The reason that we're here today is to celebrate Changemakers, which is now in its 6th year. For those of you who might be less familiar, Changemakers is where students can conduct research into different aspects of education and the wider student experience, and work with staff partners across the school to share their findings and develop some recommendations about areas that LSE can look to enhance moving forwards. We're really pleased that we have 13 of our 16 projects presenting here today. So it's going to be a packed afternoon. We've got really varied project topics, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we do.
And yeah, in the last minute change proceedings, we've got a project on closing the feedback loop and empowering the student voice in the European Institute, and that's going to be taking place in panel 4. And the launch of the 5 years of student partnership research report is going to take place earlier in panel 2, about 3:25, which we can talk about.
And just before I hand over to Dr. Claire Gordon, the Director of the Eden Centre, to say a few formal words, I just want to say a special hello to our colleagues who are joining us online, and to say that you are very welcome to post questions in the chat during any of the Q&A. Alice and I will be keeping an eye on that. You can ask your questions in the room. You can put your hand up and questions yourself. So we want you to be as much a part of proceedings as everyone who's physically here today. But with no further ado, I'd like to call up Claire.
Hello, everybody. One of the great things I get to do in my job is welcome people to events such as this, which is fantastic. So as Lydia and Alex just said, Changemakers is now nearing the end of its 6th year. The idea of the Changemakers originally came from our former Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education, Professor Dilly Fung, and it's been nurtured and developed by Alice and Lydia in collaboration with the LSE SU into the wonderful programme it is today. The completion of this year's cohort, will mean that LSE has now funded 253 students to research 133 completed projects. So thanks to Alice and Lydia for supplying me with that data. Very useful. And I also just wanted to note at the start that Professor Emma McCoy, who's our current Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education, really sends her apologies. She's unable to join this afternoon, but she will be catching up on the videos as soon as time permits. So Changemakers, I'm going to say something a little bit about student partnership. Changemakers is one of our flagship student partnership initiatives at LSE. And from my perspective, student partnership lies at the heart of good education, and it has in recent years become a principle increasingly threaded through the work of higher education institutions in the UK and also more globally to varying degrees. It's based on a recognition that to ensure we are enhancing education and what gets called the broader student experience on an ongoing basis. It's something that we cannot do for our students, but must do with our students, reflecting together, learning together, developing together, and with bringing our different skills and experiences to the table. In some sense, student partnership moves beyond giving students a voice into a space of co-creating the educational experience to ensure that it's inclusive, relevant, and empowering for everyone involved. Over the many years I've worked in higher education, I've seen how much our students care about the university they're studying in. Yes, of course, students want to do well, they want to learn as much as possible, they want to excel in their degrees, but they also want the institution they're studying in to be the best it can be, a place they are proud they have been a student in and will be an alumni in the rest of their lives. And so this is what Changemakers is about for me, bringing students together to undertake social science research, treating LSE or aspects of LSE as an object of applied academic study, to develop practice-oriented solutions for the future, which will benefit all students and therefore staff in our university. Changemakers, for me, is the embodiment of this and student partnership work, and the embodiment of good student partnership work in a social science institution. Over the last 6 years, Changemakers has been a fundamental plank of the educational change programme the school has been taking forward, which some of you may or may not have heard of. It gets called Educate for Global Impact, and it's a pillar of the school's 2030 strategy. The range of projects and brilliant insights are for all to see on the Changemakers gallery on the Eden Centre website. Changemakers, in fact, have made a very concrete difference to many areas of the school work. It's led to specific improvements at the course, department, divisional, and school level. Sometimes we know about these improvements and sometimes we find out about them by chance. it's the invisible impact of much educational change work, which is not always easy, hi Simon, to measure the impact of. So this year, I'm even more hopeful, given some changes that were put in place for making appropriate positive change coming out of your projects. And I'm really looking forward also to hearing the results of Ananya's research, because Ananya has taken a look back over the past 5 years. I think in her report, she'll be pulling together some of those important trends and findings over time. So Alice and Lydia this year have made some key changes to the change makers, which I hope will enable us to make more practice-oriented change in the years ahead. So we've instituted group projects, we strengthen the place of department and division proposed projects, with the hope that the change that comes out of your work, where appropriate, will be embedded in the future. And there's been a fostering of closer relationships between the student change makers and the project proposers. Having been involved with two and a bit projects in particular this year, I can say definitively, and I can see some of the students here today, hello, I can say definitively that their work will influence or shape our future work in the area of generative AI and education. So I'm just looking at the programme today. I think it's really, really exciting to see some of the themes of work we're going to be hearing about. I mean, all the projects look amazing, but there's all the projects on generative AI, obviously is a key priority area for the school at the moment. How does it embrace AI in appropriate, ethical ways? Those questions about belonging and who gets to who gets to speak, cut to the heart of the identity of LSE as an inclusive educational institution, and how we empower students to feel fully fledged members of our community. And then there's some really interesting projects around assessment. I'm really interested in hearing about the findings of the student project on marking criteria, all of them as well. All of them are going to be fantastic, and I don't really want to, although I'm tempted to, just list every single project on today's programme. So before I say a few thank yous, I do want to acknowledge that we have an encampment on campus, which is a particular form of student voice. Many people here will have views, potentially conflicting views within themselves. I certainly have conflicting views within myself, and also views that aren't always necessarily in agreement with others about the encampment, demands of the students, and the response of the leadership of the institution. It's affecting us all in different ways to differing degrees. I wanted to acknowledge this while at the same time encouraging us all to focus on the wonderful work carried out this year as LSE change makers, and that we're going to be hearing about shortly. So thank you, first of all, to our student researchers for becoming student change makers, for giving us the time when we know you are juggling so many different opportunities and pressures with your studies, cost of living challenges, and the many other societies and activities you might have the opportunity to get involved in. Thank you for channeling your energy, thinking, brain power to investigate LSE as an object of study and coming up with recommendations, embodying in an authentic way your identity as social scientists. Finally, actually two finallys, one is I want to thank the academic supervisors. Raise your hands, everybody give them a round of applause. Here, proposed projects or supported projects. Thank you to you as well. Thank you for coming along today. And of course, the biggest round of applause and cheers has to be for Lydia and Ellis. Anything she wanted me to communicate to you today, because she really is disappointed that she's not able to attend this afternoon. She asked me to say to you, thank you to the students for your contributions. She wanted me to thank you, colleagues across the school that helped support the projects. And in terms of closing the feedback loop, she's really committed to ensuring that we follow up with students and staff partners about how we can act on the findings of your research projects to the benefit of the entire student community. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much. We're heading for the first panel. Colleagues joining us on Zoom, we hope the technology works smoothly, but we're keeping an eye on it, so mention something in the chat if anything's gone wrong. We've got 4 panels this afternoon, as well as the preview of the upcoming research on the 5 years of student partnership. We're going to have a 20-minute break, about 3:40, and within each project, The benefit of this as well too. These questions are going to take about 8 to 10 minutes, and Lydia is poised to indicate when you've got 2 minutes to go and 1 minute to go, and then we will ruthlessly cut you off because we have too much good stuff to include, I'm afraid. And we move on to the next presenter. And we are including opportunities for viewers to ask questions. And if you'd like to ask a question from Zoom, then please send in the chat, and we will look at those also. But I want to introduce the first presentation in this first panel, which is Angelo Cortez Moreno, Fellow, and you are speaking on successful communications, mental health, and wellbeing support. Yeah. You're welcome.
You never ever please it.
Thank you. Well, I'm Angela, my colleague Laura, and today we're going to present better.
So we are going to present for you the research that we did on successful mental health and well-being support communications. And to start, we're gonna show you like a regular case. No, it's not working. Okay. So picture this. This is a student, a regular student that is facing some difficulties, as we can face because of the cost of living, because it's hard to study, because we're moving from a different country to a new one. And she will need she remembers that maybe her coping mechanisms are not working for her alone. So maybe she wants to get some support here at LSE at the university, and she remembers there is some support. So trying to figure out where to go, she finds this information that's been communicated for her, but she doesn't know exactly where to find information, where to go or who to seek support from. So we went and speak with students, and this is maybe the case of her, but maybe this is the case of other students, and they told us that maybe she can get support from the fit center, but she doesn't, but some student doesn't know if there is therapy at LSE or not, or she can see a mentor. So there is a lot of there is knowledge about the support, but it's not exactly where to go or what's the direction. So we are going to present what how can we improve this access to the services. So, and this is also a proof that at LSE we are doing something that is not as successful. So in the national student survey in 2023, this question was asked: how well communicated was information about your university college mental well-being support services? And the result shows that LSE between the Russell group is not really well ranked. So we are on the place 20, but indeed the score is 67.49%. So it's not like there is communication, there is things that are happening. So, but we are gonna focus on how can this be improved? How can we understand better what to do? So this is our research question. So what are the key components of effective internal communications related to student mental health and well-being at LSE? And to answer, we developed a qualitative methodology, and we started with the desk research, and then we did semi-structured structured interviews, we did on-campus surveys, and we did some conversation starters and a future workshops. So these methodologies, we implemented them on the Mental Health Awareness Week. And At the end, we had around 19 participants between staff and between students. And our findings, we are going to divide them between the current strategy, what is happening, what is on the paper, if we can say it, what is stated, what we want, what is the reality that is a little bit done, like people know there is something, but what is happening, and then the desired outcomes.
I think this works. Yes. Thank you, Angie. So as Angie pointed out, we discovered like these 3 different groups of communication. And the most interesting, there is a gap between the current strategy and the desired outcomes. And that gap is mostly it's mostly like due to this tangled reality. So we are going to focus on why that reality is tangled and also how to improve, because during our design of the methods, we try to understand what is happening, but also how to improve it, because we want to go further understand what the community, the LSE community, think about the mental health internal communication. So first things first, when we are talking about the current strategy, it's important to take into account we have like 2 major players here. One is the internal communication teams that run smoothly all the internal communications around LSE, not only about mental health and well-being. They have different channels, and everybody, I'm pretty sure everybody in the community has like some connection with them. Everybody has received a newsletter, it knows a little bit about the student hub or the social media, or even like know about the webpage. But the second player we have here, even if we are focusing on information, is the student support team, because right now LSE has a really strong and powerful framework, that is the framework for student mental health and well-being, that has a central commitment, that is to provide holistic support for a student. That implies services about academic culture, a sense of belonging, and of course, promotion, prevention, and provision of direct support related to student mental health and well-being. So it's important to take into account we are discussing about 2 major areas in the school that right now basically like all the services, of course, are in the student mental health, but the people who communicate and who inform about this are in the internal communication teams. But what is happening right now is like the students, as Angie mentioned, like they feel like there is communication, there is like enough communication, but when they are starting to go beyond like the initial communication, like okay, there is support in LSE, they start like facing some struggle, because that second level of communication is not that clear. So we are going to focus or zoom in that tangled reality, using like the universal elements of the communication. There are senders, messages, and channels for you to understand what is happening across each one of them. But it's important to also take into account that even if we are using this categorization, all the elements are intertwined. So first things first, when we are talking about the senders, students have noticed the information that they receive about mental health and support is mostly during the winter break, for example, and during the exam period. And they want that information to be everywhere all the time available, because they feel that there is like some kind of information that is so important that you don't need to learn about that in the middle of the crisis or in the middle of the stress of the exams, for example. There is also an identified need to streamline communications. We know, and also for you to understand, there is these 2 major players, as I mentioned before, but also the people who are like basically sending the information to the students are the academic departments, to the specialized academic newsletters. So the community feels that it's important to streamline and organize that teamwork. Also, the senders to information should be like constantly improve, like the technique. That is also something like the majority of students show up. Like one of the things, like they should be like also like gathering feedback all the time, because like situations like change for students, because like the current, like the realities also change. When we are talking about channels, indeed, like the students' primary channel of communication and the newsletters, nevertheless, they feel that the newsletters are packed. So they suggest that it's really important to send newsletter only about one topic. And this is interesting because it not only applies for student mental health and well-being, but any other topics related like sending from internal communications. They don't feel comfortable receiving like a full list of things. They want like something like it's only focused on one thing, so they have the full attention to one thing. Also, they don't feel like it's really like it's a really like barrier to how access the information in the website, because they feel like everything is just like a click away. So they just like put like student support, mental health support, LSE at Google, and everything is fine. The thing is when they go to that web page, and with that I will pass to the messages, and this is really interesting because students start saying like, even they feel, this is interesting because it's something that happening in our research all the time, that even they feel that the communication is clear and everything, they also feel that there's many room for improvement. This is messages. I went back, sorry about that. There is room of improvement. So for example, they suggest like the web page could be improved, with users, specifically the interface of user design, but also develop other solutions as a chatbot. This is only an example, because they feel like the thing is like there is so much support, so you need to, sorry. Yeah, so you need to have like a really streamlined to access the information. So there is many information. We want to invite our partners to think about the solution, and the solution is the intersection between what people think, what LSE can do, because we know there is some limits, and what is like feasible with the use of technology and other tools around LSE. And to take that into account, it's important to take in mind these strategic priorities to develop the solution at that intersection.
Yes, we can show you a slide so that people don't have to lose out on detail, because thank you so much. That was absolutely jam-packed, and thank you for starting the event.
Yeah. Thank you.
Could I invite
Sorry.
and Yuhua up?
I'll see.
I'm handing over to Ashley Shah, who's been working with Yuhua Zhang and Jessica To on student experience of and views on marking criteria in assessment.
I'm a student who takes assessment, who also uses marking criteria. So you can tell I have a lot to say, and 8 minutes certainly won't be enough, but I'll try to wrap it up. So as you see, this topic is very broad, and what our project focused on was a very initial perception and the base of the discourse and discussion that needs to be taken forward. So it won't include any quantitative analysis or any definitive solutions. Rather, the focus would be on the groundwork and the important questions that needs to be asked, and certain research which needs to be taken care of in future, and the challenges that we faced during our research. So this is going to be about that more, and of course the perception of the students. So to begin with, quickly, I'll just flag out, we had to go through various trial and error methods in order to understand what would be the right strategy or what should be the area of focus. But before that, very important point, the students we are focusing here was just the postgraduate students and not the undergraduate students. So obviously, one of the suggestions is that a separate study has to be done and a separate initial perception or data or insight gathering has to be done for undergraduate students. This is for postgraduate. So we adopted three phases that we went through. And the number one is journal, where we wanted to just get initial idea of what students are thinking about the marking criteria. It had questions like, what do you think about the marking criteria, or do you even use it? So I'll come to that later, but that is one. Number two, from the first phase, we understood that they do use the marking criteria, but certain elements are not very clear. It's very extensive, but not very actionable at some times for some students. So what they do is they rely a lot also on the faculty feedback, which is essentially to complement the marking criteria, to understand what the marking has to be. What we faced in this was there were a number of problems, certain strengths for sure, but certain limitations as well. So it sometimes failed to complement the marking criteria. So what students do is they resort to what LSE has to offer. That is, go to LSE Live and the events that are planned on marking criteria. So this is just the three things that I'm going to talk about quickly. What we understood from the journal. So as I said, this was the first phase. We just wanted to know the initial perception. And one of the limitations was this was for postgraduate students. So they did not take any summatives or the final exams. So we had to rely very much on the formatives that they have submitted and to assess whether they have used the marking criteria or not. So to say certain people did use marking criteria, it was more important for people who had to write essays rather than some quantitative problem solving questions, which has obviously a definitive solution, so you do not need criteria. So it was majorly, it's used more by essay based, it's used by students who has essay based assessments. Number two is, which was one of the most important things, and which is, I think, important for all the research, is we have a diverse background and people come from different educational background, and they are not very much equipped or aware with such extensive marking criteria. So it can be sometimes uncertain, or maybe you cannot make the best use of it, and it can be sometimes even confusing. So that is one thing. And lastly, they, as I said, they relied on the specific feedback from their faculties rather relying solely on the marking criteria. So the faculty feedback becomes very important, which is what we understood from the first round. And this was all qualitative. We spoke to people, we had some questionnaires out, but we did not rely much on the quantitative part of it. Rather, we felt that it is about experience and views. So it is better to just talk and understand the experience. So then we go to how the feedbacks of faculties are helping the students. These are some of the responses. Some are very crisp, some are very broad, but so as to say, certain people were confident enough in terms of how they felt about the feedback from the faculty. They felt like it was to the point, it was very well in detail, that it helped them understand the marking criteria. Other people were like, we do not know how to use the formatives and the feedbacks on the formatives in our, for example, time-based, essay-based exams, because that is, you are under a lot of pressure and you do not know what areas to work on in terms of improving your progress. So that was there. And a very important thing that came out of the findings is, number one, the impact on motivation, which needs to be studied for further researches. This is one area, that how is it motivating or demotivating students. Certain students found it very unclear, so they were demotivated by the feedback. Certain people found it very clear, so they were in a good space, in good mental health space. So this is one area that needs to be talked about. Number two, the effectiveness. One important suggestion which I would just flag out is the faculty, some of the faculties use the marking criteria table itself in their assessment feedback. So that is more helpful rather than giving just, of course, the comments and the details are, of course, very necessary. But if it is complemented with the table and specific areas that are ticked or that are marked, then it would be more fruitful for students to improve their next result. That is feed forward, basically, that how to improve your next result. You can attack, or you can basically focus on the targeted area to just jump forward. So that was one important suggestion that came out of it. And then we obviously had mixed reaction. As I say, people did not know how to use that feedback or how to complement it with the marking criteria. So there was a sense of, I would say, an uncertainty, sort of negative emotions about the marking criteria and the feedback among a lot of us. I am also a postgraduate student, so I happen to have a chat with a lot of my friends, and there was sort of a lot of there was a sort of uncertainty which everybody went through, and the hysteria that exams are coming, we do not know where to improve, how can we improve, what more we should do about it. So one thing which all of us, I think, resorted to, and my team also went to this study, was by LSE Life, and we saw that a lot of students turned out there, and it was pretty much an atmosphere of everybody being in the same boat. That even we are not very clear about how can we improve certain things. So these events actually helped us a lot. And when I saw that a lot of students were turning up, I contacted LSE Life and asked them for data just to have a grasp of how are people responding to such events. And it turns out that they have the highest number of bookings this year on the marking criteria and how to write the timed exam essays. So it says a lot about current hysteria, uncertainty, and there are ample of areas that needs to be worked upon. There's a very strong list of suggestions, which I'm not going to go into detail since I'm short on time, but the slides are available and you can see. This is just quick solutions. Two quick solutions is we ask teachers to add the marking criteria table. And number two, we encourage students to go to such events like LSE Live. And these are more focused suggestions, which you can see, future areas of research. And I'm not able to. Yeah. And these are for the future change makers, and I'll be happy to talk to them anytime they want.
As this is a four project panel, we're going to have a quick break for questions now. And I just want to ask any questions for our first two project presenters. Yes, over. Who you are and which department you're coming in from?
Kumar from Social Policy. One essays that LSE markers want you to read is a very colonialist perspective. I'll say no more about that. But on the question about mental health, the first presentation, I think the issue of trust is very important. I don't know if trust came up, because it's one thing to have a lot of information and links and so on and so forth, but one of the things that affect people with anxiety and depression is even to be able to act on the information that's there, right? And then to trust somebody to talk to about this. So I'm wondering if the trust came up at all in your
Yes, it came, and one of the solutions was to put faces to be more soft in the way of communicating.
And the good thing is that in general, there is a perception that the communication are compassionate. So we are on a good way, but it could be improved that way. And also between
Following on that, there is also one of our 6 priorities. We went so quick about that, but we encourage like any solution developed by LSE that take into account like the different audiences, because as you mentioned, that is the case from some students. But other students has different, for example, cultural backgrounds. They don't even know about the mental health. So definitely it should be like different messages tailored to different audiences.
Thanks so much. Another question.
Hi, thanks. I'm Jill Stewart from the Department of Government and one of the supervisors on Changemakers. That was great. And I feel like I'm learning for my own lecturing and teaching. One of the things you mentioned was encourage students to form study groups, which I think is a great idea. And I try to do that with my students, but just on a practical point of view, do you have any advice on how to encourage them?
Yeah, no, I think when we discussed on giving the suggestions, we also discussed that let us keep it voluntary, and because how study focused and study groups work for people is very differently. So for example, I do not like studying in groups, and I get more sort of anxious when I'm knowing what other people are studying or how is their progress, and it's just me. But there are people who genuinely are in a space of comfort wherein they are working in group, they are having better conducive environment and ensuring more results. So this was absolutely something which comes from student and voluntary. You can always just flag it out. But one of the quick, this is completely not on your question, but something which we also discussed is faculties, what they should do is they should at the start, at the beginning of their lectures, need to need to be very clear what are their expectations, and not just in terms of the course but also in terms of assessment, like clear indications of how you should perhaps frame your arguments or how you should write, so that they can start practice from beginning of the time rather than just being stressed out during the exam.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much for both of those. Yeah, I'd like to welcome up our next project. I'm going to introduce Jenny Zheng, Yvonne Yang, Christine Liu, and Hanyin Yao, all of whom are from psychology and behavioral science, to speak about unlocking the pathways to healthier relationships.
So for the presentation, that's like a link to
Yeah.
the screen sharing. Yeah.
Our team works on evaluation of sexual consent attitudes on LSE campus, the effectiveness of consent ed program, and also the campus climate on sexual misconduct incidents. And we first have an introduction video from one of our teammates who got a makeover here.
The screen share is paused.
So with these aims in mind, we look into the previous changemaker projects which try to address like student safety and consent education. And these projects highlight the need to improve the current consent ed curriculum and also to make it mandatory, which we're unsure of if the school has addressed these at all. And also they suggest a need to further investigate the feelings of student safety at LSE, which is exactly what we're trying to do here. So our research has three main aims. The first, to investigate sexual consent attitudes. Second, how consent ed contributes to this and whether the experiences are positive, leading to students to acquire more knowledge of consent. Lastly, most importantly, the campus climate regarding sexual consent and whether students actually feel safe on campus, and see how LSE can contribute on bettering that.
So thanks, Hang-Ying. Now I'm going to talk about our methodology for our study. So we mainly use a self-report questionnaire designed. Our survey was carried out through Microsoft Forms, and we have several modules of survey reinforced from our ARC3, which is a psychometrical method campus climate surveys developed to access the perpetration, victimization of sexual misconduct in our campus. This is on the right-hand side is a format of our survey. All responders give their informed consent and made fully aware that the responses are anonymous. Considering the nature of our study, support resources and right to withdraw are provided. We used convenience of volunteering samplings. Data collection took place on May 1st to May 18th. The survey was distributed and promoted through department emails, personal social media channels, posters around campus, and the student unions. We really appreciate them for helping us study. And regarding the main results, so first, our response is democratic. The survey collect 111 responses in total, with 86 female and 29 males, and 3 non-binary participants. The respondents have diverse background regarding their sexual orientation and degree level. Students from a variety of majors participated as well, so we have a quite representative samples of LSE students. Regarding consent ed, our quantitative data shows that on average, students think the current program is effective, ranging it from 6 to 7 on a 9-point scale. We also have open question to collect the qualitative data on consent ed. Using the thematic analysis, a lot of answers include that consent ed are informative and provide better insight. Also, the consent ed raise awareness and open up conversations. A few students mentioned that it had made me feel safer on campus because we know other people are going through this mandatory training. And 2 to 3 students mentioned that it changed their bystander behaviors. However, a lot of our responses also mentioned that they didn't learn anything new other than what they already know, whether it's from previous consent education or other resources. More importantly, a lot of number of our respondents pointed out that they believe consent ed has little impact and it's not solving the root problem. We, as LSE Changemaker, will address on this issue in our recommendations. So out of the 111 responses of our survey, only 11 of them did not participate in consent ed, and 5 of them state that they did not heard of the program, but there are also sensible reasons such as personal experience of trauma. So how do people normally get exposure to LSE consent ed? Our survey showed that most students heard about consent ed through emails, societies, and university during the Freshers Week and Welcome Week, but also student accommodations activities. These communication channels have proved to be very effective, and we suggest continuations.
Thank you, Yvonne. And now we're moving on to campus resources of support and reporting of sexual misconduct incidents. So the results are quite worrying because more than 60% strongly disagree to these 2 statements, which is, if a friend and I experience sexual misconduct, I know where to get help and also I know where to make a report. So this reflects the lack of information on relevant procedures. Also, over 80% of students reflect that they do not understand what happens when a student makes a claim of sexual misconduct, which reflects a lack of transparency. And these are also reflected through the qualitative responses when we ask them if they have anything wanting to add on this topic. And you can see that people say that there's not a lot of information on what to do. And also students think that the processes are not transparent, clear, or convenient in any sort of way. Moving on to perception of institutional response, you can see that students generally think that sexual misconduct is a problem at LSE, and this can be reinforced by the recent allegations. And people disagree with the statements that generally disagree with the statement that there isn't much need for me to think about sexual misconduct while at university. However, most students feel hopeless about the situation, thinking that they cannot contribute much to the process and improving the situation. And we can see, delving more in depth into like different facets of institutional response, we can see that even though the responses are quite spread out on both sides, however, that there's still like a significant subset of students thinking that LSE would not take the report seriously, LSE would not maintain the privacy of the person, would not handle the report fairly, and would even punish the person who made the report. So these are very worrying worrying statistics on how students do not trust the institution. And we want to highlight some of the quotes from the responses on like anything you want to add. For example, a student said, how LSE have handled sexual misconduct is embarrassing. They have failed us time and time again, and we're no longer able to feel safe on campus in like engaging in campus activities. Also, this university does not care about women's safety at all, in my opinion. I would not have gone here if I'd known how bad it would be. And also more statements on encouraging LSE's active actions in tackling the issue.
And now we'll move on to our recommendations. So we think that we should make consent ed opt out for both students and staff. We mentioned that previous Changemakers projects had suggested it be mandatory. Obviously, we understand that students, people should have the option to opt out in case of personal experiences that could be triggered through it. But making it opt out for staff as well would ensure that everyone feels safe and is educated prior to the start of the school year. And we'd also like to see campus resources be explicitly mentioned during consent ed. Currently, they're given a leaflet, but many students don't review this later on or forget about it, and they are not mentioned throughout the year. So I think further promotion would be better. We'd also like to continue and enhance current communications. So, for example, email, halls, and society collaborations, which have shown very effective so far. However, not all halls were included. So, for example, Passfield Hall wasn't, and many freshers live here. And we'd also like to commission an independent review of the consent ed curriculum. Currently, the consent ed working team doesn't have members who are consistent from year to year. So we believe this would improve it. And on an institutional level, we see a pressing need to address the alarming decline in trust for handling sexual misconduct cases, and the perception of campus safety is low. So we'd like to introduce more transparency in the reporting process and develop an impact report for the new Report It, Stop It system, so that students know how effective it is, and also create a web page detailing what exactly happens after a case of sexual misconduct is reported, including potential outcomes for both the reporter and the people involved in the report, timelines and support measures beyond counselling, especially since some of the responses mentioned the long wait times for counselling. And we'd also like more collaboration with the student body so that more students are aware. So, for example, DLTA training for consent ed facilitators, disclosure trained students, and safe contact staff, and an outline of what an ISVA does, which was recently introduced this year for LSE.
Thank you so much to Jenny, Yvonne, Christine, and Han-Ying for that project. Our final presentation for this panel, can I welcome Jess Harrison and Marimatu up to speak about how can universities embed sustainability into the curriculum.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we'll be discussing how can universities embed sustainability into the curriculum. I know this has been like a topic that has been discussed almost 10 or 12 years now, since like the early 2000s, if I'm not wrong. So, but then it's still relevant. And then also the larger context is shifting from sustainability education to climate literacy to carbon literacy and all of that. But still we are sticking to this larger framework of ESD, which we call Education for Sustainable Development. And that's what we are looking to discuss today. So why we are doing it today, there are twofold intentions here. One, how LSE can adopt some valuable best practices into the practice. And also LSE is already doing some of the things. How can we improve the visibility of those initiatives? So that's the kind of premise we have for this research. And what we do and why we do. First, like to understand ESG in a comprehensive way, it's important to have the 4 C's approach, commonly covering campus, curriculum, community, and culture, trying to look at sustainability across all the 4 verticals. But then for the purpose of this particular research, we have looked into the details of the curriculum more, even though we have some reflections from students on the other verticals as well. And even though we want to answer the larger question of how universities can do it, the focus is here again on LSE, and we're trying to bring some specific insights into LSE's work. And why we want to do it, one, ESG is a commitment of the education strand of LSE's sustainability strategic plan, and also it comes under the priority 1 of LSE 2030 as well. So how did we do that? So we had like a 4 kind of like a staged methodology. We looked into the secondary research already being done in this area, because ESG is like an area already even Eden Center has worked on in the past, and also we have a sustainability education network in the college, if I'm not wrong. So we have done a lot of work on that front. So we have done like a secondary research, and we listen to students and also to practitioners through like surveys, focus groups, and interviews. And we investigated the responses from that, and then have now developed like some recommendations. And we felt we shouldn't just leave it at recommendations. We also want to kind of give like an actionable template for the educators here who could kind of start with something simple. So we also have put together like a very crisp curriculum adoption framework, which we hope would be useful, and we also happy to hear feedback as well. I'll now pass it on to Joss to take over.
We sort of had a 3-stage approach to collecting the data based on, firstly, a survey which got about 35 respondents from 13 different departments around LSE. Then a series of focus groups with 14 students across 9 departments. And then finally some interviews with experts and practitioners right towards the end of the process. So we designed it really consciously so that these sort of happened in succession, so that we could build on the insights gained from each different stage in the next stage. So for example, the focus group questions were very much formulated on the basis of what we were reading from the survey data. And then in our interviews with the practitioners, we could sort of ask them to what extent the findings we'd gathered from students in these surveys and focus groups resonated with what they were seeing at their universities. And I think that helped us to get some really useful findings, which hopefully will be reflected in the next few slides. So some of the key insights that we gathered. Firstly, because we weren't just asking about what students want to see done at LSE, but also more sort of abstract questions about how they understand sustainability in the first place, we were able to see that students have an instinctively sophisticated understanding of sustainability. So for example, when we asked them to define what sustainability meant to them, what we were finding is that they were reproducing academic definitions of sustainability, such as the very famous Brundtland definition, without actually knowing they were doing it. So for example, in terms of their understanding of sustainability as a long-term phenomenon, which is more than just environmental, but also social, cultural, and multifaceted in that dimension. Otherwise, we saw sort of on a more practical level, we saw a lack of awareness among students about the education sustainability agenda, which is quite striking given that these students, in the vast majority of cases, profess to being deeply interested in sustainability, which implies that the program is currently failing to reach the students who should be, in theory, most interested in it. But among both students and practitioners, there was a lack of consensus about how to integrate sustainability, in particular on the question of whether it should be compulsory or non-compulsory, and also what compulsory and non-compulsory look like. And as I say, both students and practitioners and experts, there's no consensus on either level about to what extent it's compulsory to sort of force sustainability on students. Then we saw that students' engagement with sustainability is really, really dependent currently on the department they're in. So there isn't a sort of universal experience of sustainability across the school among students, which is something which, or rather the only universal feature we did see really is students' experience of LSE 100, and even that's obviously only for undergraduate students. And then finally, students want to see how they want sustainability to be taught on a more sort of practical level. They are interested in the theoretical stuff, but more than that, they want skills sessions, they want career sessions, they want to see how it's going to impact their lives and careers. So it's not just a question of whether we integrate sustainability into the curriculum, it's also about how we do so in such a way that students are going to really engage with it in a productive way. So we developed a few recommendations for the school on the basis of this. Firstly, obviously, a communication strategy to better communicate, what is going on with education sustainability and the sustainability strategic plan more generally. As I say, develop more practical skills-focused initiatives, because that's what students want to see, and that will make them engage with it more enthusiastically. Appoint department-wide, I should say, sustainability representatives to audit courses, who would then be the sort of authority figure in the department that students would know to go to ask any sustainability-related questions, and then improve the sort of course search system for when students are choosing which modules to take. And each in our vision, each sort of course would have various tags which you could easily find. So students who wanted to learn more about sustainability, for example, could look for courses and modules that had been tagged with, the sustainability label, and that would help them to find and pursue their interests. Currently, I think, and this is what we heard from students as well, the course choice system is labyrinthian and difficult and sort of outdated. So there's potentially work to be done there. But also in terms of how we leverage the student enthusiasm that we saw in our results, so to sort of the school sort of empowering students to make a difference themselves, we like the idea of setting up induction sessions during Welcome Week, where students start learning from the day they arrive about how they can both practice, learn sustainability while they're at the school. We like the idea of holding workshops, forums, and feedback sessions so that the Eden Center isn't doing this work by itself, but continually getting feedback from students about what they want to see, again, in how they learn and how they practice sustainability. And then finally, each department could recruit a student representative or volunteer to regularly liaise with the departmental staff representative I just talked about, so that that's unfolding on both levels, not just at the staff or the student level. So yeah, I'll pass back now to Bala.
Yeah, that's
A minute and a half.
We're finishing it in a minute. So we wanted to see how the educators here could also do it in a very simplified manner, not really take up like a load on understanding ESD in a theoretical way. So we have come up with this very simplified framework. But again, I want to say that the parameters we have is not something we have invented. We have taken from multiple references and tried to kind of put together as a framework. So we want the embedding sustainability, ESD in curriculum, or integrating ESD in curriculum should be a collaborative process. We hope the course managers will work with students to do that. And across like some 30 to 40 universities that we have looked at so far, we saw that their vision to ESD kind of is entered through one of these kind of like areas. Either they approach ESD through UN SDGs, or they look at that from a social justice or environmental justice perspective. So it's good to also enter through one of these. And we also set like what we teach, whether we want to set ESD as a value or as a knowledge or as skills, like how do we want to deliver this on. And finally, also like pedagogical tools, how do we interact with students in the class, what kind of tools we are going to use. This is from Eden Center. It's not something that we have put together. And then finally, the competencies. How do you go and do the assessment also on these kind of courses? This comes from the learning outcomes, learning objectives from UNESCO. So we kind of want to integrate all of these steps to say, pick a entry point, set a goal, and then pick a pedagogical tool, and finally also frame your assessment in alignment to that. We hope like for any course, there could be like a ESD pathway that you can create with students, which could be like a simple way to start with ESD, and then you can see how you want to theoretically improve on that. And like the last one, like we want to just highlight that these are the particular attributes based on the analysis we have done with the focus group discussion data, like maybe students are more interested in, so you can take a closer look later. And we have some questions for the next year's change makers as well to carry on.
Well, so much, Bella and Joss.
Okay, welcome to our second panel. This panel is composed of 3 presentations, the first one of which is a pre-recorded one that I'll be sharing with you. For our online viewers, if you could please let us know in the chat if there are any issues with the video stream, that would be much appreciated. I think all the panelists from this panel were here from the start, but just in case you weren't, we will be holding up some signs to help you keep to time because we've got such a packed afternoon. Ellis, we've got a new one to let you know now if you're halfway through, and then we'll let you know when you've got 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then when you've reached time, we'll ask you to wrap up with a sentence, just because we want to make sure that we've got plenty of time for the Q&As and for everyone to get to present today. So with the spirit of keeping to time, I'm going to share our first video. Okay, so this video is from Rohan Prakash and Andre Garcia in the Department of Economics, and they're looking at how do students taking courses in economics engage with the Piazza discussion forum.
Hey everyone, we hope you're all well. Thanks for coming to our presentation. My name is Rohan, and alongside Andres, we will be presenting the key research findings from our project. So, our project focuses on understanding the learning behavior and engagement patterns of students studying economics modules with the discussion forums that the department provides. Through the study, we aim to deliver insights into how the department can better structure and use forums to engage the learning experience. A key feature of our analysis is looking at the 3 major forums that the department have used in recent years, namely Moodle, Piazza, and Ed. Each forum has its own pros and cons, and we dive into these accordingly. So later in this presentation, Andres will demo how each of the forums work specifically. Here we can see screenshots of the general UIs of the 3 forums. So first, Moodle, Piazza, and then this is the homepage of the Piazza forum. This is what a standard post and answer would look like on the Piazza forum. And now finally moving to the newest forum, Ed. So you can see the homepage there, and then also what sort of your average post and question would look like. We look at 2 things, really, to sort of do the study. We first look at the data set that we received from Professor Petropoulou. So we were provided with comprehensive data around forum usage across 5 economics modules in the 2020 to 2021 academic year. A core feature of our analysis centers around the data visualization and analysis here. Moreover, we wanted to gain feedback from current students about how they use forums more broadly in order to fill certain gaps and complement the previously mentioned dataset. For example, we wanted further information about the effectiveness of forums, student preferences across forums, so between the 3 forums, Moodle, Piazza, and Ed, and finally, how forum usage varied between term time and exam season. So, to begin with, we wanted to first understand whether forums more generally are a useful learning resource for students before diving into specifics. We find that this indeed is the case from our survey and the dataset. So this can clearly be illustrated by our results. We created a 5-point scale that grades the understanding of a student on average after they viewed a post. So 2 indicates that understanding did not improve, 5 indicates that the relevant concept is now fully, clearly understood, and 1 would indicate that understanding actually worsened. We find that the average effectiveness score on our scale is 3.8, so average understanding clearly improved. Moreover, every student appeared satisfied with response times. The effectiveness of forums can also be illustrated by statistics around forum usage, e.g. aggregate numbers of views per student, how often they view this forum, etc., which we get from our dataset. We find evidence of regular usage during term time for the median student, and this actually becomes daily during exam season. Note that actually this is also for the average or median student in terms of forum engagement, which in and of itself is very significant. So our visualizations from the survey here depict these points. Here we can see that virtually all students found that their understanding improved across all the forums they use. And here we can see that most students regularly use forums several times a week or a month, and during exam season, forum engagement rises very, very rapidly, becoming daily for the majority of students. So, To reinforce the quantitative evidence that students find forums a valuable learning resource, here are a selection of quotes from our survey, where we asked whether students find forums helpful and how much they affect their learning. Virtually all students agreed that it significantly improved their understanding of concepts by providing a very, very accessible avenue to ask questions and clarify doubts, as well as viewing other students' doubts as well, and testing understanding. Many students find it easier to formulate questions over a forum than an in-person discussion, so like an office hour, for instance. So we've established clearly that forums on the whole are very, very effective, but how can we make them more effective? Well, a key observation across our 2 data sources, and anecdotally from our experience as well, is the idea that most engagement with forums is silent. So in other words, most students do not actually post or answer anything, or very little on forums, but instead read and use the existing posts and answers as a learning resource. The bulk of student posts and answers is done by a very, very small minority of students for most modules. We will first demonstrate the evidence for the prevalence of silent learners within the data. While it is clear that silent learners still find forums to be useful, as demonstrated previously, it would likely be beneficial to reduce any potential barriers that these students experience in asking or answering questions. So this is what we aim to discover. So, silent learning is very, very visible on the scatter plots of student contributions, which are defined as how many questions or answers did a particular given student post over the year, across the number of days that said student spent online, grouped by first-year modules and second-year modules. We see that the overwhelming majority of students log onto the forum very, very frequently, but that a handful of students, maybe around 5 to 10 for each module, are doing the vast majority of contributing. For example, as can be seen on the left plot, one student in EC201 contributed 700 times in total, while many students contributed very little. Note that the difference in scales on the 2 plots, but that doesn't really diminish our point. This trend again is seen with this scatter plot, which shows the total number of contributions by a particular student, but now against the number of posts viewed by said student. Again, a lot of students view a lot of posts here and are therefore using the forum very actively, but then contribute very, very little. So now, turning to our specific recommendations. We have found that forums are an integral part of the learning experience for students, regardless of whether or not they ask or answer questions. It is very clearly frequently used as a learning resource, and all students find it to be helpful and effective in boosting their understanding. As far as the pattern of silent learners, surveys indicated that anonymity is central to encouraging silent learners to become less silent. Moreover, some students were hesitant to post for fear that they might confuse the student that posted further. A way of getting around this would be to have teachers more regularly endorse student answers, so it is clear that all posts are monitored and eventually checked by teachers. Finally, incentives such as awards for active participants will always help. So, the next section will focus on the preferences and features of the specific forums now that the economics department have used in the past, so we can deliver insights as to how forums can be further improved to enrich the student experience. I'll now hand over to Andres.
From our survey, we have found that students overwhelmingly prefer ED over all other discussion forums, with Piazza coming in second and Moodle coming in third. In particular, we found there's several reasons for this. Firstly, ED has a much more accessible and cleaner user interface than Piazza and almost certainly Moodle, and Moodle and Piazza both feel clunky and outdated in comparison. Also, ED is able to group questions by week or by topic, and is able to filter questions much more easily, which allows for students to search for a particular topic and a particular question without having to go through and scroll through tons and tons of questions. Furthermore, there are also other issues with the other 2 forums. First of all, Piazza sells student data and often asks students for a monetary contribution, as seen in the screenshot at the start. And also, Moodle's anonymity feature is not obvious, and in fact, when you click anonymize yourself, it will still show up for you as not being anonymized, which can often confuse students and lead to them not thinking it's anonymous. I will now demonstrate Moodle. The first issue with the Moodle forum is that it takes a lot of different hyperlinks to get to the actual forum itself. And also, once we get there, we have to scroll through many questions to find the actual question that we want, rather than simply being able to filter or search for a question. This makes it much more complicated and much more difficult to use. And each time we open a question, it opens a brand new web page, and we have to go back. Well, this differs from, say, ED and Piazza, where all of the questions are open on the same web page, and we can search and filter questions by particular weeks or particular topics. And so for this reason, Moodle is much more clunky and much less popular among students. And so that's why we also suggest Ed. Going back to our survey included some open-ended questions asking students their thoughts, and we have a selection of responses of their thoughts on Ed and Piazza and Moodle. So here's a selection of them, and more can be found on the anonymized spreadsheet linked earlier in the slides. And some of the key points are that navigating Moodle is awkward, as we've shown before, and that Ed forums have nice filtering methods. Another suggestion that we see at the bottom is that departments ought to coordinate with one another and use one particular platform, as this makes it simpler to keep track of questions rather than having different platforms for different modules, which can complicate things. Our overall recommendations to the Department of Economics are that, first of all, it should standardize and use Ed for all forums in future, and if possible, encourage other departments to also adopt this forum, as this was suggested by other participants in the survey. Furthermore, discussion forums should be used across all years, as it was flagged up by some of the participants that third year courses sometimes do not have a forum, and this can make things, and as we saw earlier, forums are particularly effective across all years. And finally, we should encourage actively teachers to engage within the forums, as this again makes it more effective, as we discussed earlier. So just some final thoughts and to conclude. We have found that forums are overall highly effective in enriching and supporting the learning experience at LSE, and are able to generate and improve learning outcomes among students. Adopting a standardized forum, our recommendation of which is Ed, will allow for improved ease of use. And finally, we should encourage silent learners to take a more active role within the forums by ensuring that they are anonymous, and also including regular endorsement of answers. Finally, thank you very much for listening to our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach us at the 2 emails on the slides. Thank you.
Thanks to Rohan and Andres for submitting that video, even though they weren't able to be with us here today. So I think they've given us lots to think about. Next up, for our next live presentation, we've got Mia Rasso from the Department of Psychological and Behavioural Science and Anna Ward from the Department of Government, investigating the integration of state-educated students into the LSE community. Welcome up.
So welcome to our presentation, where we're going to go through our research on understanding the academic and social integration of undergraduate LSE students from non-selective state schools. So just to introduce our variables a little bit, we split integration into academic and social. We understand social integration as how included and involved students perceive themselves to be. This includes things called co-curricular experiences, which are your internships, societies, and research projects as well, alongside relationships with peers and staff. And we understand academic integration to be students' assessment of their own academic performance, their progress, and the belief that staff are committed to supporting them academically. Now, these are both subjective measures, therefore our report focuses on subjective experience. However, integration is inherently a subjective experience, so we don't see the subjective nature of the report to be a limitation in any way, as LSE has a duty to make students feel part of LSE.
So part of the background is that there are lots of different education types within the LSE. So we broke educational background down into non-selective state schools, selective state schools like grammar schools, and independent fee-paying schools. And we looked at these separately, both in the UK and also overseas. Integration is essential for students to have a positive experience at university. Feeling excluded from the university's academic and social communities can lead to a negative spiral effect, where students disengage, leading to lower attainment, poor well-being, poor graduate prospects, and high dropout rates. There is lots of research in the higher education sector and at the LSE regarding widening participation. These efforts are essential as students who are most likely to enroll at the LSE are from high-income groups or areas with high educational progression. However, there is a research gap regarding student experience with integration. For example, the National Student Survey compares universities rather than the individual experiences of groups of students within universities. Furthermore, the universities that admit the highest proportion of students from non-traditional backgrounds regularly have some of the highest dropout rates, suggesting a problem with the university experience rather than the admissions. It is not enough for students from non-selective state schools to gain access, rather they must stay, progress and thrive in their university experiences.
So this was a mixed methods project, and for the quantitative part, we sent out a survey via many different channels in order to get as many undergraduate students to apply as possible. The survey looked at quantifying perceived integration and support, as well as obtaining demographic information in order to analyse the results. We had 192 respondents, although we were slightly underrepresented in terms of the number of overseas students and a little bit overrepresented in terms of non-selective state school students. We then conducted 6 semi-structured interviews, diving a bit deeper into the personal experiences of students. We had 3 non-selective state school students, 1 selective state school student, and 2 independent school students. Once we decided how many people we wanted from each background, they were randomly selected from the survey based on their educational background and their demographics, so for example, whether they're home or overseas student, genders and years of study, etc. So moving on to the results, we'll start with the quant. So this graph with error bars shows that average integration is lower for non-selective state school students than students from other educational backgrounds. A very similar graph to this also exists for social and academic integration, and a t-test confirmed that these mean differences are significant. We also plotted integration alongside perceived support from LSE, and we found that non-selective state school students had lower minimums for both support and integration. You can also see that as support increases, academic integration also increases for all educational backgrounds, but non-selective state school students are still less integrated than their peers. A reverse causality test showed that it is support that influences integration, not the other way around. So support is definitely a factor here. However, there's clearly another variable at play due to the fact that non-selective state school students feel less integrated than their peers when they perceive the same level of support. And finally, this is just one of our linear models, and it shows that those with the lowest scores of integration are still more likely to be from non-selective state schools.
So our qualitative results broadly supported our quantitative findings. So our analysis produced 8 themes surrounding academic integration, 6 themes surrounding social integration, and 1 theme that explored the intersection of the two. Students from non-selective state schools reported that they did not feel as integrated into the academic or social communities at LSE, whereas their peers from other educational backgrounds reported higher integration. Students from non-selective state schools widely regarded social interactions at the LSE to be dictated by who does and does not have money and felt a cultural divide. While we do not presume that students who have attended these schools are from lower income backgrounds, our qualitative results do highlight at least a perceived class difference based upon educational background. Students say that academic and social integration are negatively influenced by the lack of support, resources, and understanding about their background from the LSE and from their peers. While both groups acknowledge the significance of their social integration on their well-being, once again, students from non-selective state schools reported a lack of social integration was more negatively impacting their well-being. There is a notable difference in students' experiences of imposter syndrome. Students from non-selective state schools discussed feeling out of place, stupid, and inadequate, whereas students from other educational backgrounds were more self-assured. Students from all backgrounds noted the high expectations from LSE regarding prior schools such as referencing and essay writing. Students from non-selective state schools were also concerned about the expectations of critical thinking skills. When asked about the support systems at LSE, one student remarked that the support systems and academic mentors were awful. They expanded on this and discussed how they felt it was poor that it wasn't expected of academic mentors to regularly reach out to their mentees. While for some students from other educational backgrounds, it seems the support systems work well, as when you need support, you can get it. It's clear that LSE cannot leave this responsibility on the plates of more vulnerable students.
So to conclude, we have significant findings that non-selective state school students at LSE feel less academically integrated, socially integrated, less supported by LSE staff and LSE as an institution, less happy, and they feel like imposters more frequently. Now, there were a couple of limitations. I'll just mention a few of them. Firstly, the lack of international students to answer the survey, and more generally, the lack of international state-educated students at LSE. This meant that we found no significant differences between overseas and home non-selective state school students in terms of integration. But obviously, we can't rule them out purely on sample size.
So, building on our research, we have 4 key recommendations. The first one is to reform the academic mentor system, as we want to ensure that all LSE students have a close relationship with their academic mentor by having regular in-depth sessions to increase their academic and social integration. An academic mentor should know about your background so they can support you going into your future. LSE student support systems rely on the principle that support is there if you reach out. This report is clear that some students will require more support than others, and therefore the onus should be on them.
Secondly, we want to fund the social empowerment of disadvantaged students. Things like student finance, bursaries, and scholarships only provide enough money for people to live and not to do things such as socialise. Our report makes it clear, especially on the qualitative side, that socialising in London is a barrier to non-selective state school students. So funding would allow students to foster relationships rather than worrying about the cost.
We also asked that there are more affordable, varied, and regular social events put in place, as building social networks do not need to be an expensive process. The LSE and the LSE SU should provide more events which focus on affordability, variety, and frequency. For example, regular board game sessions at different times and days to ensure that every student, no matter their circumstance, has access to a social community.
And lastly, we want to provide department-specific skills sessions. LSE cannot assume that all students have the same skills just because they are all academically able, because we don't all come from the same background. There should be department-specific skills sessions to teach things like referencing and critical thinking, and they should be timetabled in and separate to LSE life in order to level the playing field.
We leave you with this final quote. Thank you so much for listening.
Both so much, and we look forward to returning to your presentation in the Q&A. Now for the final panel, final presentation in this panel, if I'd like to welcome you up. Here we have 3 students from the Department of Sociology, so Yukon Wang, Shuki Liu, and Zhao Yi Liu, who are looking at understanding students' attitudes to the use of generative AI and academic integrity. And while you're coming up, I'll get your slides ready.
Thank you very much. So, hello. Today, our group will be presenting our findings on student views on the LSE generative AI policy. And my name is Alice. These are my teammates. This is Maggie, and this is Gary. So our first and also the primary research question is, how do the LSE undergraduates view the school's generative AI's policy? And since we've got many students who are doing a multidisciplinary course or taking an outside option from other departments, we also hope to explore how the students navigate the difference between generative AI policies across different departments. So we are adopting a mix of survey and focus group for our methodology. And we designed and delivered our survey questionnaires through the LSE Quadrix, and we gathered 51 valid responses. We mainly attracted responses through our personal contacts. And then to further investigate our findings through the survey, as well as to complement the limitations of the questionnaire, we held 2 focus group interviews, with one in person and the other one online. And we had a total of 13 participants from 8 departments. All of them were employed through our survey, as we asked them to leave their email if they are interested in participating in the following focus group. And we gained full informed consent from all the participants.
Yeah, and moving on to the findings from the survey. Yeah, so the first question we actually asked them is how do they know their department's AI policy? Because clearly many people don't know their department's policy, as you can see from here. It's a really small figure, but in fact, as we will see later from this survey, more people actually are not familiar with the policy. And from here, we can see that the majority of people, or 40% of our respondents actually say that they learned this from Moodle, and Moodle seems to be a popular site in which they learn the generative AI policy. However, this is actually quite concerning because this is a multiple choice question and they can actually select all of these options. But even then, only 30% of people select Moodle, which is the most popular one. So it clearly reflects that the communication process can be improved in many ways. And later we asked students about their attitude. And in this research, we're not really interested in how the departments of the school actually do things. We're interested in students' attitude. And the first statement we gave them was, are you familiar with this department's AI policy? And I want to emphasize something here because in the previous slide, I can show there is an option which is I do not know my department policy. If the students select that, they actually do not answer this question. So although here you may see that, well, people who select strongly disagree or strongly, or somewhat disagree, that figure might be a bit low, but in fact it would be higher because some people, they just don't answer this question. And from these two graphs here, we can see that although kind of a majority of people claim that they are familiar with the department's generative AI policy, there are still about 30% of people who would not be confident in their department's generative AI policy. And then from another graph on the right, you will see that many people, in fact, do not believe their department communicates their AI policy, clearly. Although, again, the majority of people do feel this way, but but this still shows that there are many rooms for improvement. And we also asked whether they agree with their department policy and whether that the use of generative AI is encouraged in their department. And a majority of students reflect that, well, the department does not encourage the use of generative AI. But this might be changing because LSE recently purchased Copilot for students. And then this, most people responded to that in April, so that it might be different now, but this is what we found. And then do students agree with the department AI policy? Well, there is a mixed view here, and I can't really give you a conclusion. But if you look closely to the graph on the right, you will see there is a bar which has no label, and this is intentional. It is intentional because the three of us didn't find out that we made a mistake there. However, I put our slide to Copilot and asked, well, are there any mistakes in the slides? And it was pointed out there. So I intentionally left this here to show that how AI, it can be used in many different ways. And this leads us very, great to this finding here, which is how students actually use AI. And we found that the majority of people, about 70% of people, use it to understand academic terms and to refine their language in their essays. And we didn't think about how AI can be used to create images or improve PPT, but as I've mentioned from the last slide, it could be a potential category that people actually use. So mainly our survey shows that people find generative AI to be useful to save time in researching resources and finding resources. And the last point, and which is probably the most important finding here, is that LSE has many different AI policies, and then sometimes each course offers a different generative AI policy, and then 66% of our respondents who take courses from different departments say that, well, they think this is kind of confusing for them and it is hard for them to navigate whether they can use generative AI for each course. So there is definitely many rooms for improvement on this. However, interestingly, there is a mixed view on the preference for AI policies across courses, and this point will be demonstrated more clearly in the focus group.
Okay, so I will share some of the specific findings from the focus group. In terms of the specific use of AI, which how students use AI specifically, most students, they found coding is very important as a part of the use of AI, and especially for those students from data science departments. And for some students from Department of Politics, Government, and Sociology, they mainly use AI for essays, summary of key concepts, and understanding of the key theory. And also, they will use this to criticize their work, to have a reflective learning process. And for those whose English is their second language, they usually use it to refine their language, and most students found it very important to use it in that way. And it is a very interesting description here that a lot of students they describe the use of AI, the process, as a teamwork, because it's a very interactive process between you inserting several prompts, and then there is response from the AI. Yeah. And in terms of the AI attitudes, most students, they say they agree that the use of AI has improved their learning and academic performance. But it's very interesting that there is a disconnect between what policy actually is and how it is implemented. This is a view that shows how students, they actually still use AI regardless of what the policy is. And the reason for that is most students, they, especially for those from social science departments, when it comes to writing essays, they need to know first what this essay prompt really means. And there are some hidden meanings between their understanding of the essay question, and also whether do I answer the question directly. And sometimes, as I mentioned, they use it to have a self-evaluation, to seek for advice from the AI in terms of whether they really answer the essay question. In terms of the attitudes towards policy, most students they think that it is very unrealistic to prohibit AI policy fully. And also sometimes they found, because there is an AI policy, and sometimes teachers, they may adjust their exam formats because they are worried that the students, they may violate the policy. For example, they may adjust they may delete more presentations to have more in-person exams, or they might be afraid. And because of these, students, they think they have more inconsistency in terms of the exam format, and there are more fluctuations in terms of that. Specific instructions in terms of where AI can be used and how to use it, it's not very clear in terms of where exactly the AI should be used. And sometimes students, they mentioned there are different variations, depends on different courses and the teachers. And also most students, they think they want to have a unified school policy, though there could be adjustments based on different courses and different subjects they're learning. And also they think it's very necessary to have a special committee where student academic representatives are actively engaged in, and the students' voices engaging through this special committee. And also more non-exam related guidance. I think it's very interesting that they describe the design of the AI policy should not be like a either nor, like a strictly prohibited, but should be more like a scale. Like we have a scale from strictly prohibited, and there are spaces where we could open to discussions in terms of specific guidance, and more guidance related on non-academic use should also be promoted. Yes.
But before we do that, we have one presentation, another one that's a little bit different, but something that I'm equally excited for. I'd like to introduce our colleague in the Eden Centre, Ananya, our graduate intern, who's been doing a retrospective thematic analysis on what can be learnt looking at the Student Partnership Archive of 5 years of outputs as a whole, rather than just as individual projects. So welcome, Ananya, to come speak about that. So this is the introduction to a report that's shortly going to be available, and which we will email out to all attendees should you wish to read it.
Am I audible to everybody? Yeah. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for the warm introduction. And a very warm afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to be part of today's Changemaker project. I'm Ananya, a graduate intern for Student Partnership Insights at the Eden Center, LSE. This presentation is an official launch of our report, 5 Years of Student Partnership, What Our Students Need, which would soon be made available. My aim today is to provide a brief overview of the structure and the content of the report, simply to start the conversation of how do we understand the need of diverse students at LSE in a rapidly changing world, to support the students in reaching their best potential both academically and professionally, and to co-create an inclusive community. This is the basic structure of the presentation today. So the main purpose of the student partnership initiatives is to create a mechanism for students to critically reflect on their personal journey and engage in a decision-making process across institutions. The two main mechanisms adopted here are research and dialogue. The first one is reflected in the Changemakers project, one that I'm certain that the audience is aware about today. It's a collaborative research program between LSE and LSE Student Union. Through this program, students undertake independent research and map creative ways to investigate the causes of things, as we saw in today's presentations. In the last 5 years, over 100 plus projects have been funded by LSE, reflective of students' critical thinking, methodological sophistication, innovative solution-oriented approach. Few key topics that have been included in the last years have included community building, career and opportunities, and inclusivity and decolonization. The second mechanism is Student Education Panel, which brings together 50 students from across degree programs and levels of study, creating a safe and principled space for students to collectively reflect on their experiences. Few themes that have been covered in the last 5 years have been generative AI, student voice, academic culture, education, and employability. For both the initiatives, the recommendations offered by the students are then communicated to the senior leadership, facilitating co-creation of solutions with relevant stakeholders. Coming to the report, I think the aim is to bring the different topics in conversation with each other, which is to come up with themes that categorize the research and in turn highlight the interconnectedness between them. As I will discuss shortly, the key takeaway from this theme is that they are fluid in nature and they're best understood in relation with each other. For writing this report, I've developed a simple qualitative research project. This involved thematic analysis of 100 plus changemaker projects and insights from Student Education Panel from 2018 to 23. Secondly, I reviewed the official reports and strategic plans commissioned by LSE. The most significant here is the LSE 2030 strategy. Finally, I formulated 4 broad themes and 9 sub-themes to categorize the students' recommendation. The purpose for all of this is to design a standardized guide and a living document of non-hierarchical, cross-cutting themes. Strategically, this will facilitate implementation of actionable goals recommended by students across the years and planning priorities of student partnership insights in the coming academic year. So the broad themes. This infographic provides a quick overview of the broad theme categories that have been designed for this project and the key topics covered with it. This is based on the targeted areas that have been defined by the student experience. To begin with, the first one is the academic and the career development, an essential category for the students. The common link between the topics here is a strong desire among the students to have a meaningful engagement with their degree, to gain transferable skills for better career opportunities, and to enhance the overall academic culture at LSE. The second is the theme of community building. I think the key questions to take into consideration is first, in what context do demands of community building come up? Secondly, what is the nature of the community that is being demanded by the students? And C, what changes these communities will bring in fulfilling students' expectations at the institution? Here, I'll highlight few factors of achieving this, but I will build on this later. The third broad category is of identity and inclusion. The topics included here are based on being a social category, that is race, queer identities, neurodiversity, religious beliefs. And B, I have chosen residence as a common link between commuting students, international students, and students with forced migration backgrounds. This theme reflects that A, students' experience at LSE is shaped at the intersection of their race, class, caste, gender, sexual orientation, political context of the country of residence, among others. Secondly, It best demonstrates how changemaker projects have developed in relation with each other. For instance, in 2021 and 2022, PL's research highlighted the experience of gender non-conforming students at LSE. One limitation of this project was it lacked an intersectional lens. In the following year of 2022 and 2023, Bajaj and Sanathanan incorporated this in their project by exploring the experience of queer students at the intersection of the resident status as international students. The last broad theme is of school and interdepartmental concerns. For this category, I have included the themes based on A, the common concerns underlined across departments, B, the recommendations demanding creation of a universal strategy by students, and C, the dependency of senior management for the implementation of the recommendations that is coming through. This includes topics of sexual misconduct and campus safety, mental health, the element of decolonization, which have demands raised from anthropology department, economics department, international history, international development law, among many others, and student activism. I'm going to quickly run through the sub-themes. The report, I have developed 9 sub-themes for this report, which basically highlight the nature and the target of the recommendations that students are putting forth. This includes awareness, communication, curriculum, events, infrastructure, inclusive pedagogy, research, representation, and support. The detailed breakdown of the sub-themes will be available in the report later. Just mapping the research and the glance at the major takeaways of this project. 2 elements of the LSE 2030 strategy have been significant in shaping the students' research. That is priority 1, LSE education for global impact, where students are agents of change and the inclusive student education experience, and the priority 3, which is developing LSE for everyone. The significance of this research is in contextualization of these goals and providing an intersectional reading of these goals. Second, the research questions and aims that have been put forward by the students come from their experiences in class, seminars, student halls, London as a city. At the same time, the global concerns and political developments like the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement have also influenced the students' research. Third, that this research is designed in conversation with each other, and they achieve the dual goal of fulfilling the research gap both at the school level and UK higher education level. And B is to bring the theories from their classes into action, encouraging a critical and constructive relationship with various aspects of LSE. I'm now going to take example from one broad theme to demonstrate how the report goes about. Building on the 3 questions of community that I highlighted before, community building has been mentioned in 13 projects in their research topic of the change movements. Elements like class participation and engagement, academic mentor, communication, student societies, infrastructure are considered few key pathways for this purpose. I use 4 sub-themes of events, infrastructure, inclusive pedagogy, and representation to categorize all the demands that have come, all the recommendations that have come in this theme. But by taking an example of 2 research projects in 2021 and 2022, among many others, projects by Isabella and Siba underline that both neurodivergence and religion as social categories affect the students' experience of community. Joel Hopper in 2020 and 2021 concluded that student activism facilitates the process of community building. Thus, adding 3 keywords, that is A, full and meaningful participation to overcome structural and institutional barriers, a sense of belongingness which is across all social identities, and a student voice which includes freedom of expression, opportunities for critical dialogue, and participation in decision-making, the interrelation between the first broad theme of community building and the second theme of identity and inclusion becomes more explicit. The report is much more clear than my dialogue here. The last part is looking beyond. I think the report needs to be followed with the ongoing work of mapping the achievements across departments and school levels, where recommendations of students have already been put into practice. Given the political demands, given the political context, it is also necessary to legitimize diverse forms of student voice and see them in interrelation with the student partnership activities that have taken place under these projects. I emphasize on the quote and the specific line that student activists are the most passionate stakeholders at LSE. I also acknowledge that I have the privilege to do this research here, when there are no universities left in Gaza. I extend my solidarity to the LSE Palestinian Society, authors of the Assets in Apartheid report, and the student activists leading the encampment here at LSE. Lastly, I think the support that I have received from the Eden Center, both professionally and personally, is difficult to put in words. Firstly, Dr. Claire, I think the warmth, respect, and acknowledgement that I have received from you reinstate my strong faith in the institution and the center. I am beyond grateful for every opportunity that you have given me so far. This project is a shared labor of Dr. Ellis and Lydia, who have supported me, who have supported the research and created a safe space for me to express my views as a researcher. A special mention to Lydia, who embodies the true spirit of student partnership, who truly listens and cares for the sentiments of students. You have left an impact that will shape all my research in the coming years. Thank you so much.
I want to welcome Riishi and Salaho, who are going to speak with us about student perceptions and use of generative AI and to support their career developments.
On the top right.
Everyone, so our topic today is about student use and perceptions of generative AI in their career development. A little bit of background. So the motivation of us choosing this research topic is because we feel like AI is radically transforming the world of workplace, and this topic is very relevant and timely for us students seeking job nowadays. And we adopted a student-centered approach. That is, we aim to hear the voices of students and letting the viewpoints of students guide and inform our research as well as policy recommendations. And we aim to make our research better able to equip the students with the skills and resources to cope with the evolving job market. That is to say, like a focus on future readiness. And in terms of our research objectives, firstly, we aim to investigate the impact of AI on students' career development. Specifically, that involves understanding how AI technologies, and specifically generative AI, can be leveraged by students for their career development. And moreover, we researched about students' perceptions and usage of AI. That means investigating students' perception, how they perceive of and think of a range of AI tools and how they are incorporating it into their career development strategies. After a little bit of literature review, we found out the several factors that's associated with students' positive and negative perceptions with using AI in their career development. So some factors associated with increased interest in using AI for job applications include beliefs about AI's effectiveness and enjoyability, higher networking anxiety, and being a first-generation college student. And the negative perceptions of AI tools are sometimes due to the AI tools being too difficult to navigate and being inaccurate and impersonal. And from our literature review, we found out a need to balance control with trust. That is, with the emergence of new technology, there are a lot of uncertainties, and we need to be cautious facing potential risks. But on the other hand, when enacting regulations, we also need to make sure not to make the rules inadvertently stifle innovation. And our research contributes to the existing literature by placing it in an LSE specific context. And here's our methodology. So we adopted a mixed method, including one survey and one focus group. That is to say, combining both qualitative and quantitative data. So in the first part of our research, we used Qualtrics, which covered multiple choice questions and also a range of free response questions. And the focus group then served as an opportunity for students to elaborate on their answers. And in terms of recruitment methodologies, we used convenience and snowball sampling. And specifically, we made a poster and distributed across campus, and also shared the information on social media, such as in WhatsApp groups and our friends and classmates. We also reached out to the through the Changemakers official call for participants page, departmental newsletters, LSE career newsletters, and we also reached out to the student education panel as well as professors from relevant courses and relevant student societies to spread the word. That include a course called Ethics of Data and Algorithms and the LSE AI Society. And additionally, in terms of our demographics, we had 70 responses to the survey and 9 participants in the focus group, which comprised of 7 postgraduates and 2 undergraduates. And all of our participants came from a very diverse range of departments. And in terms of the for the survey, we had mostly postgraduates, mostly females, and mostly Asian and Asian British and white participants.
So we found that students varied a lot in their frequency of AI use and how familiar they were with using AI. And of the students who said that they did use AI in their career development, mainly it was mainly used to create cover letters, create resumes or CVs, and prepare for interviews. And there were some other reasons listed up in that chart there. And the most popular AI tools people used were ChatGPT, Grammarly, and CareerSet. We found that a majority of students said that they believe their future career would rely on AI at least a moderate amount, if not like an extreme amount. And students also believe that more employers and other students were also using AI now. And however, we found that there were a lot of varied opinions when they were asked how useful they found using AI to be. And yeah, overall, students perceived AI positively. So around like 55% said they thought AI, they viewed AI somewhat positively, and then I think 18% said extremely positively. But even so, students thought that there were some concerns with using AI. So the advantages of using AI, they thought were that using AI could save time and save effort. So like during a focus group discussion, the students were describing how they would use ChatGPT to create cover letters. So that they would first like copy and paste a job description from LinkedIn, and then put that into ChatGPT, ask it to create a cover letter, and then edit the output. And they found that helped save a lot of time, but they would also have to put in effort into like revising sort of what ChatGPT generated, because they found it to be a little generic and uninteresting. So they'll still work to like edit that. And another disadvantage was the potential data security or privacy risk. Students weren't really sure how trustworthy like AI or these technology companies were and what they were doing with their private information. Another concern was potential bias or discrimination from employers who use AI, since students weren't quite sure how employers were implementing AI in the process and whether there was any bias involved in that. However, students did view AI, did have a positive perception of how AI would play a role in the future workplace. Students thought that that having AI would mean that there would be new jobs or new opportunities for them to work alongside AI or interpret AI output. And then another one disadvantage was the potential over-reliance on AI and how that could lead to limited creativity or critical thinking skills. And yeah, so in conclusion, more and more students are using generative AI now, but there's still a lot of uncertainty and confusion on how to use it efficiently and how to balance the advantages with the disadvantages. So students found AI useful in some ways, but limited in other ways. And they also, so in general, students would appreciate more guidance and support on how to better integrate AI into their career development. We did ask research participants for their suggestions on what LSE careers could do to better support them in terms of their AI use. And some of those suggestions were to organize workshops surrounding how to use AI efficiently or introducing them to different AI tools, providing hiring insight from the employer's point of view, so like giving them information about how employers are using AI in the process and how like whether it's during the screening process, screening of like resumes or CVs, or later on in the process. And another suggestion was to have an AI newsletter where there could be like some tips or information about how to use AI efficiently, and so on. Yeah, and that is all from us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rory and Stella. I'm going to do questions after the next presentation. Don't go anywhere. So next we have another recording from somebody who can make it in person. We've got Isabel Parker, Yuki Chung, and Sonia Jain, who've been working on personal development for life beyond LSE. So I hope a nice pair with the last project we saw. Do let us know online if you can't hear, but I hope you'll be able to.
Everyone, welcome to our Changemakers project on personal and professional development opportunities at LSE. My name's Sanya.
I'm Yuki.
And I'm Isabella.
So to introduce our research project, it was proposed by Philip, who was our advisor and is a learning developer for personal and professional development at the LSE. So the base of our project was the fact that LSE aims to support its students to understand and to shape our rapidly changing world, to become agents of change. So during this project, we looked at what LSE students needed in terms of development opportunities beyond the academic development that we already get, to become effective agents of change. We focus on development opportunities that the LSE Life or LSE Career Services offered that alumni either found useful or would have liked to pursue while studying at the LSE. And our research complements an ongoing personal development pilot with current students, and our findings will be used in line with the wider research at the LSE. So we looked at some previous research in which we found that there was a previous Changemakers project that covered a similar topic. And Sarah Asif found that in the 2018 to 2019 academic year, many undergraduate students found that the advice given by the career services was vague and not tailored towards a specific career. Julian Taylor found that a module focusing on employment-related activities, such as cover letter writing or assessment center exercises, led to a 31% increase in students securing graduate employment. Bates et al. Found that students enrolled on a personal development course in their final year were more likely to be in employment or further study 4 months after graduation. And Cranmer, Mason, and Williams found that employer-led involvement, such as talks and guidance of career services and modules, increased the ability of students to secure graduate level employment. So for methodology and research design, we constructed our interview questions with 3 main focuses. So we wanted to look at the alumni's experience and usage of LSE Life and career services during their time at the LSE, whether these services or opportunities communicated by the LSE will adequately prepare them with the skills necessary for the graduate application process and the skills needed in their current career. And in retrospect, whether any improvements that could be made to the LSE Life and Career Services. So we asked alumni whether they could suggest any improvements that they personally think could be made. And we utilized a qualitative approach. So we carried out semi-structured interviews to LSE alumni currently in the workforce. So the way we chose our interview respondents was we utilized the help of LSE page, where they have an AI tool called Ask an Alum, which connected us to alumni at the LSE that fit our specific criteria. So our criteria for interview respondents were they had to have completed their undergraduate studies within the last 5 years. We wanted graduates that came from different academic backgrounds. We had a wide variety of participants, and we wanted our respondents to come from various geographical backgrounds. We chose this criteria because development offerings and support vary widely across the LSE. Similarly, we wanted to analyse whether experience differed between home, EU, and international students. We wanted our respondents to have graduated fairly recently to ensure our findings were tackling the most current and salient issues.
Here are our results. Firstly, the most important skills mentioned by interviewees were soft skills such as active listening and interpersonal skills, handling pressure, public speaking, and time management. Additionally, the most useful services mentioned were mock interviews, which 2 people said, Excel workshop, which 3 participants discussed, and the CV workshop, which 3 people discussed also. Additionally, networking events with different speakers was also mentioned. We advised to expand on these offerings, and additionally, 1 person said that the careers events were oversubscribed. Additionally, skills workshops were not communicated well enough, and startup international companies' work was too focused on the USA. So LSE Life and careers could improve on these topics. On the topic of well-being, 1 participant said that the counselling waiting list at LSE is extremely long, and counsellors don't offer specialised support. Moreover, some general thoughts from the interviewees were that 2 participants discussed a lack of promotion of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, such as not being aware of the importance of spring weeks until too late. 1 participant suggested a fund for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to buy a suit for interviews due to their expensive prices, and more support in careers for these students. Additionally, 2 participants said that if you don't know what you want to go into, then it might be hard to find what you need. There should be more signposting / more guidance and nudging to see what you're good at. Additionally, 4 participants said that there is minimal breadth of options of industry. For example, there is no software or tech opportunities, and people who don't want to go into the typical industries did not have career services / workshops available.
So, having collated what all of our interviewees said, we have come up with the following recommendations. Firstly, greater qualitative support is needed. For example, Bloomberg Terminal workshops, building TCFs, and forecasting models. Many said that those who don't have accounting modules within their degree would find it beneficial to actually have accounting workshops and be able to learn some basic accounting skills needed for future careers. Secondly, there should be greater technological advancements learning. 3 participants actually emphasized the importance of learning coding and how Python should be taught instead of R within our degrees. Furthermore, any workshops that were there for coding weren't either communicated well enough or available for people from all different levels and degrees. Furthermore, LSE should potentially introduce more speakers from the technology world, discussing tech trends, utilizing AI and the growth of crypto, given that this is a skill that needs to be developed as we go into the future. Thirdly, there can be assessment day workshops which LSE careers can introduce. This would help organize practice with groups of students, given that our interviewees emphasize how important soft skills are, and meeting other students within this area would help them build a more supportive network and relieve some stress that comes from preparing for these assessment days. Then there was also new networking methods that people suggested should be introduced. All 5 participants emphasized more active networking opportunities or mentorship boot camps with companies that come to campus. For example, 1 interviewee explained how American universities and even Oxbridge host career events where you can hand in your CV in person to the recruitment or the representatives that have come, and they can shortlist you for a coffee chat or a mentorship scheme. There should also be easier ways to contact alumni in similar fields, and if they are available, then they should be greater publicized to students. There was also emphasis on a greater breadth of career offerings. 2 participants discussed how important it is that LSE shows students the variety of careers that they can enter. Perhaps this can be done by offering a career stream or channel where LSE students can apply to a channel they're interested in at the start of the first or second year, and LSE careers can then recommend you on steps to take and people to speak with to better understand that career and be prepared for interviews. 2 participants also suggested departmental level support and how that would be beneficial in terms of discussing what industry previous students within that department have entered. This would help focus talks on non-traditional industries. For example, 30% of students in anthropology go to industries other than finance and consulting. So having the opportunity to speak with those students who haven't entered those traditional backgrounds would give a much greater variety of careers. Lastly, greater wellbeing support is needed. LSE can expand its counselling services to make sure no students face long wait lists, and also better publicise wellbeing opportunities such as meditation apps that LSE subscribes to, or more physical health opportunities. So, our conclusion. While LSE careers have expanded their services over the years and provide more tailored career support through CV workshops and skills labs, graduate interviewees in retrospect do argue for greater provision of services. All participants felt that given LSE's prestige, the variety of services offered should be greater. LSE often cultivates this career of finance and consulting being the sole industries that students should look to enter. As such, our results have found how important it is that LSE presents students with more information on different career paths, such as in the startup world, or diplomacy, or politics, and many others. Results also show that current support provided lacks the tailored advice that students find from other services such as SEO London and other providers. It also lacks more of a forward-looking outlook into skills that are needed to develop for the future. As such, inviting alumni or banks to conduct workshops may be a solution to this lack of tailored advice. And in terms of having a more forward-looking outlook, developing LSE's tech workshops and teaching students how to tackle the growth of AI can be important. Many students also felt that job opportunities publicised by LSE Careers and LSE Life were disproportionately skewed towards London and the UK. Hence, greater support for international students or people looking to work abroad can be really useful. We hope that this research can provide preliminary understandings into what LSE Careers and LSE Life can further develop to better support its students in their professional and personal development opportunities. Thank you so much for listening. And while unfortunately we can't be there in person to take questions today, please do forward any questions you may have to the email seen below. Thank you.
First presentation that we've got in this panel, if I could invite up Anna and Alicia from the Department of Gender for their project, Who Gets to Speak? The Impact of Gender and Race on Classroom Participation in the Department of Government. Get your slides up for me as well. Move left and right, and welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Do we have the microphones?
That microphone will pick you up if you stood there, but this one's good for influenza.
Oh, okay. Sure. Okay, then I think since we'll be doing the slides, we'll just
okay. No worries.
Hi, my name is Alicia and this is my peer Anna, and today we're going to talk about classroom participation in the Department of Government. Particularly our research investigated the way gender and race impact classroom dynamics. And so for this, by doing a thorough research in the literature, we identified that there were indeed gender dynamics in the research under the term chilly climate. So this is a concept that was used to identify factors due to students or maybe faculty that created an environment in which women felt stifled to speak. The literature also identified that there were differences in behavioral patterns in participation, where Black and Asian students felt participated less than white students in the classroom, especially in research targeting the United States. And so these identity markers impacting impacting participation were also linked to psychological factors in which students maybe felt confident, or depending on whether they were male, female, or from different ethnic backgrounds. And so results in general were quite mixed, where the way the methodology was conducted, whether it was survey design, observational, or if it was qualitative focus group interviews, had differing results. And that's why we decided to really think about how we would conduct our research at LSE.
In terms of research design, we conducted 2 focus groups with 8 participants each. We follow the same structure in each of the focus groups with the same guiding themes, which did not only exclusively ask about gender and race in participation dynamics, but rather ask more comprehensively about student experience in participation. One focus on gender, with participants identifying as women, and the other one focus on race, including racialized students of all genders. In terms of moving to the analysis and findings, first and foremost, we found gender and racialized patterns of participation. In both focus groups, students extensively discussed gender and race as meaningful, substantial categories which mediate classroom participation, which shape who speaks, how do they speak, for how long, as well as confidence and willingness to participate. There is a general diagnosis that white men students speak for longer and more amount and more frequently than their female counterparts. And there's also a description of 2 groups of students. One which are used to the UK British system, whose English is a first language, and the other group which would be international racialized students. These 2 quotes illustrate these descriptions. I think that the male students tend to be dominant, and that doesn't just mean the amount of times that they speak, but it's the way that they carry themselves in the classroom. So in terms of race as a mediating factor in participation, there's many ways by which race acts in this regard. We would like to highlight 2 of them. The first one is discomfort, in the sense being the only or one of the few racialized students in a classroom is associated with discomfort, with feeling different, which leads to decreased levels of participation. This quote very well illustrates most of the time the only person in the room who's Black, and so I do feel a bit more conscious of what I'm saying. And then strictly related to this, there's the native informant, which is described several times by racialized students who feel that when they have to speak about racial issues, they're expected to speak for the entirety of their culture or their geographical area. In terms of gender as a mediating factor in participation, we've also uncovered different mechanisms, which will be in the written report. But here, we would like to highlight 2. The first one is confidence. There's a recurring diagnosis that white men are simply more confident than women, and consistently more confident, which prompts them to speak more, for longer, and importantly enough, also in a less self-conscious manner. As this quote also illustrates, I think that the males who have more of an innate confidence say things that they don't think before they show to the rest of the class. In terms of chilly climate that Alicia introduced before, we haven't found any faculty behavior that creates this chilly climate. However, in both discussions, students ascribe importance to the role of teachers as mediating of teachers' moderating role of student incidents, which could create a chilly climate.
We wanted to also look at gender and race from an intersectional point of view, so not only as separate identity markers, but the way the intersection of the identity of students would maybe create a unique experience. And because of the scope of our research, by only having 2 focus groups, we didn't really have enough data to point to an intersectional position that was different. However, we have found that women from minority groups most often say that they would need more time in class participation, and that because of language barrier, but also confidence, they would want to write down what they were about to say, maybe think a bit longer about the comments before taking part in a classroom discussion. And so this came to mostly experiences of having a minority point of view that might not speak to everyone, and needing maybe to feel this feeling of wanting to have your opinion backed. And so we can't really tell for if that experience is at the intersection of their identities, but we thought this was at least a first avenue with how our two focus groups allowed us to research. So we found also within our research measures to incentivize participation. This was part of the discussion in our focus groups, and the top three, but we have many more in our report, were the importance of the first seminar. A lot of students emphasized how the tone that was set by the seminar leader would have a lasting impact on their willingness to participate, and having for instance, a seminar leader that emphasized the importance of having of drawing on your own individual experience, especially if it's not represented more broadly, would have value and meaning. Also having time to formulate questions, because a lot of students where English is their native language might be more quick to respond. And so this is a finding that was in a previous Changemaker research, which focused more on language as your first language and the impacts on that on participation. And we find it again here as kind of mediated through race and ethnic identity. And so finally, assigning maybe students, plural students, to a reading week would make students who are less willing to participate feel responsible and accountable to participate that week, and maybe encourage students who don't usually participate as much to feel like they owe this in a way, but in a very volunteer way. And so that was an important finding that students liked and discussed about.
And to end, we have conclusions and limitations. There are several limitations, but the most important ones to highlight here are the ones associated with the focus group methodology. There's a limited sample size, there's limited representativity of student experience. There's also the sampling bias of conducting only 2 focus group. And as Alicia hinted also, we have the limitations associated with maybe because of the limited sample size, we haven't been able to go in depth into several issues such as intersectional experiences, but also intravariation of racialized students. And then at the mode of conclusion, there's two main takeaways here for today. First of all, is that race and gender do matter in shaping classroom participation dynamics, and we found this to be the case extensively in both focus groups. They do in matters that we've outlined here. They do in other ways that are going to be in the written report. And apart from that, we've also found different factors that shape classroom participation, not related to gender and race, but which were also included. And the second takeaway is that, as Alicia has introduced, there are measures that could foster a more inclusive participation dynamics, and that, first of all, are not too costly, and the second of all, are relatively feasible and straightforward to implement in classrooms. And that is all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much. We'll be having a Q&A at the end of this webinar, so if you can stay around, that would be much appreciated. Do we have our next 2 presenters here? Because we've got a video recording, but they said that they might be hoping to stop by for the Q&A. No, maybe not. But I'm just going to load the video that we have next. And this is from Ziying Guo and Yicheng Yang from the Psychological and Behavioural Sciences Department, who have been researching Where Do I Belong? LSE Student Sense of Identity.
Hi everyone, we are Group 15. Our research question is, where do I belong? Does career adaptability contribute to sense of belonging? I would like to firstly introduce why we chose this research question. When I was in my first year studying economics at LSE, I felt everyone around me were talking about Spring Week, and I felt so different from the majority of LSE students who are so career-oriented, and I constantly doubted whether I belong here. Therefore, I proposed the hypothesis that being career-oriented is positively associated with sense of belonging. To test the hypothesis, we decided to use mixed method containing both quantitative and qualitative analysis. And our target sample are LSE economics undergraduates. Firstly, because I want to see whether other economics students have the same feelings as myself. Also, economics department is the largest department at LSE, so our results can have more implications. In total, after data cleaning, we have gained 42 responses from LSE BSc economics students. In terms of the research process, the first step is survey collection, which measures the degree of career orientation and sense of belonging of our respondents. Then, based on the responses we collected, we conducted linear multiple regression to test for association between career orientation and sense of belonging. After that, moving on to the qualitative part, we firstly conducted 6 one-to-one interviews to gain richer and detailed description of participants' feelings and thoughts. And finally, we conducted thematic analysis and offered some ideas to improve sense of belonging for LSE. Now let's dive into the quantitative part. For the measurements, we use PSSM, Psychological Sense of School Membership, to measure sense of belonging. It is a commonly used measure by past research. It contains 18 items like I feel like a real part of LSE. People here notice when I'm good at something. We repeated this measure by firstly asking belonging at LSE as a whole, and then belonging at economics department separately. To measure the degree of career orientation, we use Career Adaptability Scale. It contains 24 items, like thinking about what my future will be like. Moving on to the findings part. Firstly, we would like to present some descriptive statistics showing the distributions of our variables. Firstly, we found that the distributions of belonging in economics department and at LSE are really similar. That means our respondents do not separate the concept of belonging at LSE or at econ department, and they represent each other. Secondly, the distribution of career adaptability is nearly normally distributed. However, even the minimum of career adaptability is quite high, roughly 50, reflecting a strong job-seeking atmosphere at LSE. Thirdly, distributions of belonging in economics department and LSE are actually negatively skewed. That means most people have a quite high sense of belonging at LSE. However, we also noticed that the minimum of them are quite low, around 20. The main result of our quantitative analysis is career adaptability is positively associated with sense of belonging, which verified our hypothesis. The linear regression we conducted is the equation in the box, where the dependent variable is sense of belonging either at LSE as a whole or economics department. Independent variable being career adaptability, and we include some controls for demographics, including age, year in university, gender, and ethnicity. We found that for belonging at LSE as a whole, the association is roughly 0.3, and it is statistically significant at 5%. And also for belonging in economics department, the association is roughly 0.2, and also statistically significant at 5%. Since we are also interested in the results of people with different ethnicities, therefore we tested the association for the white subgroup and found out that the association is actually negative and not significant at all. But that might partly because we only have 9 white participants, so that the result is not representative. Then we tested for the Asian subgroup and found that the association is really large, and it equals to 0.446, roughly 0.5, and it is statistically significant even at 1% level. Therefore, we conclude that the positive association is mainly driven by the Asian students. For the reasons, this might be because that Asian culture is quite collectivistic. So Asian students are easier to feel peer pressure and influenced by the job-seeking atmosphere and wish to conform to the social norm of finding jobs. Another observation is that the invasion of job-seeking agency among Chinese students is really high. It is potentially due to the collaboration with many Chinese societies at LSE. And spreading anxiety about job seeking is one of their main marketing strategies.
Okay, thanks Ying for introducing our study and survey results. To gain a deeper understanding of our question, we then conducted 6 one-to-one interviews. Please note that participation in the interview is entirely voluntary. Finally, we have 2 males and 4 females, 3 of them from the second year and 3 from the third year. Unfortunately, we did not include any white participant to confirm our previous assumptions. However, we still have a diverse Asian sample, with 1 from South Korea, 2 from China, and 3 from India. The first question we wanted to explore was how students define the sense of belonging. As you can see from the bolded text, every participant mentions the word people without exception. As one participant put it, I think the sense of belonging is not in the school itself, but in the people you meet there. Therefore, we can conclude that people play a significant role in how much sense of belonging students feel when evaluating their environment. Now, let's move to the second question that interested us. Whether undergraduate economics students perceive LSE as a university with a strong job-seeking atmosphere, and whether it is good or bad thing for them. In line with our survey results, we found that students who have a clear career direction and better planning adapt more effectively to the environment, and therefore have a stronger sense of belonging. They perceive more control over the uncertainty in the university environment and feel confident about overcoming challenges. A strong job-seeking atmosphere provides more opportunities than pressure for these people. However, we also heard some different opinions from those who have a lower sense of belonging. And I need to address that students do not complain about the job-seeking atmosphere itself. Actually, almost everyone recognizes its benefits. The issue lies in LSE's excessive emphasis on career orientation, which leads to peer evaluations and conversations revolving mostly around the number of internships secured. This is where the toxicity exists. For example, as one participant said, if you don't get an internship, then you are less worthy than someone who got an internship. And if you got an internship, the ones who are still applying will be jealous of you. Some participants also mentioned that peer pressure can make students question their time allocation for job hunting, studying, and leisure, thereby affecting their life rhythm and increasing their anxiety. Also, many participants said that due to the career orientation, there are too few non-job-related activities at LSE. One participant said, the job-related society and events are more there as tools for this is here to help you achieve this job, but I feel they don't create as much of a sense of belonging. In the students' narratives, we also discovered an interesting phenomenon that we hadn't considered before, the domination of British culture. This domination is evident not only in social activities, but also in job-seeking activities. As one participant said, the pop culture isn't a familiar social method for non-British international students, which makes it harder for them to open up and make friends. In terms of the job-seeking activities, one participant shared, I don't think I have the concept of spring weeks. It is a very British concept. So when you come here and see British students doing it, you feel you need to do it. If don't, you are gonna fall back behind in this country. Therefore, what I want to argue there is the information barriers caused by cultural difference might further negatively impact individuals' career adaptability and decrease their sense of belonging. Based on the ideas from the students, we have following 6 recommendations. As mentioned earlier, people play a significant role in the sense of belonging, so 4 recommendations are suggested to increase peer interaction. The first one is changing the teaching pattern. We prioritize this one because 4 participants mentioned that in their economic classes, they just sit there and listen to a teacher go through problem set. The lack of class discussion prevents students from getting to know each other. Secondly, we recommend LSE and economic department increase non-job-related activities and events. LSE is a highly diverse school, so it can leverage this advantage by hosting more multicultural events. Some students also suggest that reopening the Piazza platform and upgrading the economic department's common room to force peer interaction and enhance the sense of belonging. Also, two recommendations are proposed to break information barriers. As behavioral science students, we suggest the economic department can utilize the social norm intervention, which means that people might change their behavior after knowing the actual attitude and behavior of the majority. The reason we propose the intervention is because one participant pointed out that loud minority may skew the perception of LSE as a university with a strong job-seeking atmosphere. While job-seeking may stand out, it does not represent everyone. Departments can provide accurate statistics on job placement and academic pursuit to dispel this misconception. Also, department can organize workshops to disseminate career information. For example, explaining local job terminology such as spring weeks early on can help students become more familiar with and adapt to the UK job market environment more quickly. Okay, that's all. Many thanks for your listening.
Thank you so much for watching that video. On to our next presentation. Oh, yeah. The next.
Sorry.
So I'd like to welcome Piazza to their presentation, Boosting Financial Support Applications Amongst Eligible LSE Students.
Thank you very much, everybody. Let's start with an introduction. So one thing that I want to start highlighting is the LSE Strategy 2030, which outlines the principles that LSE wants to continue building upon. One of which is obviously all about bringing all kinds of different students within the LSE environment. Now here is in the Access and Participation Plan very clearly outlined that LSE wants to support underrepresented groups to access and succeed within LSE. However, there is always the aspect of financial support that a lot of people from underrepresented groups always struggle with, particularly within an environment such as the LSE. We do know that financial assistance has a big impact on both mental health, on quality of life, enjoyment of the university experience, and most importantly, also on academic studies. However, there is some anecdotal knowledge out there, particularly in regards to students within LSE, that potentially they don't actually reach out to the in-course financial support, not enough to the in-course financial support that LSE actually has available. Whether it is that they don't know about it, they simply don't apply for it, there's many levels to it. So this is why I decided to look further into this. Now here are our three main research questions. The first one, you can already tell is more of a quantitative one. Which factors are associated with further financial support applications in LSE bursary recipients? I will be explaining in a second what I mean by LSE bursary recipients and why we're looking at those specifically. The second one is, what are some of the drivers and barriers to eligible LSE students applying for national support, which is what Jazal mainly really explored qualitatively. And finally, bringing it all together, the final question is, how can we encourage more eligible students to apply for financial support at LSE? Now, on the quantitative side of the methodology, we looked at the main data source of records of LSE bursary recipients from 2017 to 2022. Now, why did we look at LSE bursary recipients? For background, it's around 300 new students every year that receive the LSE bursary. They're people from all over the UK with UK citizenship, and they're people from low-income households. Now, we decided to be looking at this subgroup of individuals because they're likely the ones that they're definitely a subset of people that very much need this financial support, this in-course financial support that LSE is offering. So although we can't really, with quantitative aspects, really tell much about those that are not applying for in-course financial support, we can look at those that are applying for the in-course financial support and maybe have some insights based on that alone. Now, there were many variables that we had here, with in-course funding received being our main variable that we're looking at. And then we had a lot of independent variables that we decided to look at from academic year to year of studies, all the way to demographics, as well as scholarship amounts and so on. Now, the pathway to quantitative analysis was first, obviously, cleaning the data, then a lot of exploratory data analysis to understand more what the correlation between the different variables is, then do some hypothesis testing, and then try to fit a regression to it. Now, I'm just going to walk you a bit through some of the demographics and statistics you can already get with the descriptive variables, because I think that's already quite interesting. What we already see here from a sample size of more than 5,000 people, that, remember this, these are people from like low income backgrounds. Only 3% of those individuals actually receive in-course funding. Again, we don't know how many of them apply, but only 3% of them actually receive the in-course funding that we decided to be looking at. Equally here, we are looking at the per year distribution of people that receive the funding, and the per year distribution of the entire data set. With the entire data set, we see that it's quite even. And on the other side here, we see something that could be a good indication, mainly that from 2017, we've been seeing a bit of an increase in people receiving in-course funding, although we see a bit of a dip here in 2021. We also see it a bit here, but here is more exacerbated. It could be associated with COVID. From this data alone, it's not very clear what happened. Now, ethnicity distribution. If we look at an entire data set of all 5,000 people, we see a bit of a different demographic than the ones that are receiving financial support. Here, in the entire data set, we see 42% of people being Asian, whereas we really see a drop, for example, of Asian ethnicities in course funding receivable. Obviously, this is good evidence that maybe people that actually need it are the ones that are receiving it. That of people who are of household income of under 10K are most likely to be receiving in-course funding. A very striking one is that 40% of those receiving in-course funding have a known disability. And moving forwards, we really want to keep this in mind, and will be very much explored by Giselle in the qualitative findings. Very, very quickly, this is just a correlation matrix. We don't really have time to look over it, but this is just to see the fact that to explore the strength of a lot of relationships we actually see with in-course funding, which is the variable that we're looking at, is actually strikingly not very strongly correlated with anything, which is interesting. Which was, however, further explored in chi-square test, where although the correlations were not strong, they were very, very significant with several of these variables, such as year of study, which I've already talked about, ethnicity as well, domicile country, whether it is England, Scotland, Wales, as well as household income. Finally, with t-test as well, we decided to explore with the amount of bursary awarded. Here was an interesting one, that the mean amount of bursary awarded to students who received in-course funding is slightly lower than the mean amount awarded to those who did not receive in-course funding, which bears the question. Students who receive in-course funding are provided less in other forms of financial aid. Again, this will be explored more a bit in a second. Here, I tried my best for many, many hours to fit a logistic regression, and I tried many, many different types of logistic regressions, and I was not able to fit one. If anybody here is very good at machine learning or other analysis, please talk with me afterwards. I don't have time to explain why I went wrong, but I'm very happy to talk about it in Q&A if needed.
Yeah, so I'm just going to try and very quickly talk about the qualitative side of things. Yes. So we conducted some interviews with the students about their experience applying for financial support. And this is our poster that we advertised. So we also considered people who were considering applying just because we wanted a bigger participant pool. And the majority of the students were recruited via the student voice event that we attended with LSE Changemakers. So thank you for that. And we also installed some of our posters across the campus. We actually got 29 responses, which was really good. But out of those 29, only 10 people showed up to their interviews.
Yeah. So out of these 10 people, 6 of their applications were rejected, and 1 person was considering applying, and 3 out of the 3 that got accepted, 2 of them actually were rejected initially, and they had to apply again. And we conducted a thematic analysis on the results. And just very quickly running you through this. So we consider the literature in terms of capability, opportunity, and motivation to the behavior. And we try and fit in some of the barriers that people might be experiencing while applying. So for example, financial literacy or knowledge of the scholarship itself might be a psychological capability. At the same time, for example, external support, lack of social support might be a barrier in terms of opportunity, which affects the behavior. Okay, so we identified 4 themes. The first one is impact on quality of life, which this quote summarizes very well. It says, if you're not from a certain financial bracket, it's more like surviving at LSE. So as you know, a lot of the students are currently struggling with the cost of living crisis. And this ranged very differently for students. For some of them, it was being very frugal with personal spending. At sometimes it was even trying to be more careful with even spending for food or basic needs. Yes. Don't have time to go through all the quotes, but please have a look. It's really important to note that while students were waiting, they still had to make adjustments financially, and the waiting times actually range from 3 months to more. The next one is time and accessibility. So it was quite vulnerable for students to have to write application about the reason that they are seeking this funding, because this funding is specifically designed for people who are in an emergency situation. Yeah, so students found it to be very time consuming, and some of them even said it was using intimidating language, and some international students found cultural differences to be a big thing when they're completing the form. There was also concerns about LSE financial services efficiency. So they were concerned that if we are to actually increase the number of people who are applying, then LSE financial services wouldn't be very efficient, and the waiting time would even be longer than this. Yeah, and the third theme is social support. So a lot of the students felt like the process was very inhumane. They felt like, okay. Yeah, yes. Social support was a big thing. The next one was mental health. I want to point out this quote because I think it's very important. And this student actually applied for financial support 4 years ago. And they didn't, after they heard the initial rejection, they didn't hear anything back. And something happened to them in their life, but they didn't get any referral to wellbeing services from financial services. Yeah, these are our final recommendations. Sorry, just very quickly. Trying to use more empathetic language is important. Trying to make wellbeing services more joined up with financial services is also very important. We recommend putting resources available for students to reduce that gap in knowledge. And yeah, increase outreach to year 1 students. Sorry, and thank you.
Thank you so much. You powered through the end of that admirably. And for anyone who does want to hear more about those details, we can share the slides if you email us, but the full reports will be up on the research gallery over the summer. So please do engage with this report in its full detail, because we can already see that it's got such important findings. So thank you both. So now, moving on to our final presentation for today, if I could welcome up Charles and Nikita. I'll pick the slides. So Charles and Nikita from the School of Public Policy, but have been looking at closing the feedback loop specifically in the European Institute. So okay, that's and just to let you know that we'll help you with timekeeping. We'll hold up a sign when you're halfway through, when you've got 1 minute, and then time to wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Hello all, I'm Nikita with my fellow researcher Charles, and we're super happy to be here, finally meeting you all. So LSE super cares about the feedback, what people feel, what students feel, and how we can actually make their experience even more better. So here we are taking care of closing the feedback loop for the European Institute in particular. What was our research about? So here we primarily wanted to focus on whether how much students are aware of how, of their feedback, of their quality, whether they are aware of how much it has been acted upon, what modes were they made aware, and at the end, what actions were they taken, and whether they're satisfied with that. So we first tried to understand what really were the pain points with the institute. So communication was one, wherein we wanted to identify the platforms, how we could effectively communicate to the students. Second was expectation, whether do we match their expectations and whether they are satisfied with, in case they receive on the alignment with the expectation. Third was the satisfaction, the degree of satisfaction the students have towards their feedback, whether it was acted upon. So we, our data subjects were current students and alumni, and we had 21 of them, and all of them, they had previously given the feedback to the European Institute. Our methodology comprised of 4 elements. Firstly, the first was the pain point identification. We were super kind to have Aphrodite and Natali with us. They helped us understand with multiple consultation meetings, and we tried to understand looking at the historical feedback analysis. We try to look into some of the papers, some of the elements, the data we previously had, and try to understand the common themes, concerns, and gaps which previously students have been facing. Then we try to develop a questionnaire based on those themes and try to be more as comprehensive as possible. Then lastly was the data gathering and the results analysis. And here we have a glance of the form that we circulated. So coming to what we found was very interestingly and a very good news for us was that 100% of the students, even if they know that yes, they are in the European Institute for only a year, still knowing is very important for them. Knowing the results of the feedback is very important for them. For 100%, it was important for them. Of course, the degree varied from moderate to extreme. So again, the good thing was that majority of the feedback that they provided were about the improvements on in-school experience. So these can be taken care of. And the best part is that they are mostly within the short to the medium term, which we can implement and which the results can be seen by them probably during the term itself. So these were from short, medium, long term, and immediate. We bifurcated into some of them.
Okay, so what we found is that while respondents were generally satisfied with the results, and I think this is our conundrum, right? Because they were satisfied, but at the same time, they were not aware. So our initial question was, what were you satisfied about? And I think this is where we kind of developed the idea upon consultation that what they were satisfied was about the feedback process. So they were okay with the feedback process, but they're not really aware of the outcome. So it's not about the outcome of that feedback that they were satisfied with. And this is a very important metric when 66.7% of them were not even aware of the feedback. Now, for those that became aware, one thing that we realized, so we asked them, which mediums made you aware of that feedback, assuming it does or it did happen? So some of them said email communications, announcements in class, and majority of them are word of mouth. Now, what's the problem with these types of platforms? The first one is that a lot of these platforms are temporal. So once it's announced in class, you might not be in class and you're not going to be aware of that feedback. Some of them, which makes it also easily missable. Second, if it's word of mouth, then as we all know, it might not be a reliable source of information because what can be said to you and what can be said to the other person as it progresses can vary greatly. And then finally, what we found is that if it's through email communication, another problem that we found, and this is, I think, an insight I got from participating in Lydia's student education panels, is that there is an overwhelming amount of information that you receive via email that you choose not to look into your email and be aware of that important information. Next slide, please. So when we asked them, are you then satisfied, assuming you became aware of it, were you satisfied of the results of that feedback? And most of them are indifferent to it. Some of them are satisfied, some of them, and this is the first one, the first graph where we actually found some negative kind of perception towards it. Some of them are dissatisfied towards that feedback. What we found here is that maybe that indifference breeds from the fact that they lack awareness of the outcome of that feedback. And maybe that can be changed if they became aware of that feedback. That's why the next question we asked them is that, is it important for you to know the results of that feedback? And a significant majority of them told us that it is important. It's 90.5% who felt the importance of that feedback. And next slide is, and beyond the results, and this is where we ask them, if, for example, that feedback is something that's negative, the outcome is negative, you did not get your initial aim for that feedback, would you still be generally, or would your satisfaction improve, assuming that you were made aware of that feedback? And they told us, yes, it is. And critical information here is that they also wanted to know the status of that feedback. That means general and regular reminders of what's happening with their initial application. Next slide, please. Now, and this is more of like a side project we had. So initially, we wanted to talk about the feedback loop. And then we wanted to kind of test a hypothesis. If students are made aware of the limitations of that feedback, maybe their suggestion is, I want a new common room, or I want a new building. And LSE would tell them, maybe we can't do it in the next 3 months, right? Would that awareness of limitation change their perception and their satisfaction on the outcome of the results, especially considering that we found that 52.4% of them were not generally aware of the limitations of that feedback. That means whether it's a short-term feedback, it can be achieved within the term, is something that they might not be aware of. Next slide, please. What we found is that if you manage expectation, it also heavily influences the satisfaction they had over feedback results. And here, we can see that 85.7% of them felt that if you initially told them that, yeah, maybe the building is not possible within our lifetime, so within the next 5 years, then 85.7% of them will increase their satisfaction over the feedback that they're going to receive. Next slide, please. Now, after this, so we now know that making or managing the expectations of students with regard to feedback is something that is important for us to have. Our question then is, and we ask them, what are the mediums by which you can, or we can help you close the feedback loop? What are the avenues that you can become aware of that feedback? The first one is, of course, they asked monthly meetings with staff. So as touch points, email, Moodle, webpage, social media, because most of them are already populating social media compared to Moodle. And I think what was interesting here is they're asking for it to be available in the alumni newsletter and LinkedIn group. Because for most alumni that we have, they don't have touch points. They can't access word of mouth announcements for them to access the results of their feedback. They also requested end of program updates. That means they want to get the feedback results or the status of their feedback at the end of their term before they leave LSE. And finally, a mobile application where that can be their go-to. Whatever happens, they know where to check the results of their feedback. Next slide. Okay, so hopefully, with all our recommendations, we will close the feedback loop. And the two takeaways here, I think, is the accessibility of that feedback as well as managing the expectations of that feedback. Because at the end of the day, and what we found is that contrary to popular belief, because initially I thought that as a PGT student, I won't care about the results of my feedback. This result showed that we actually care. Thank you.